Good evening, class. TP365 Economics. We have 4 classes and 120 pages to cover. So we'll discuss most of the conceptual questions in the class. I'll give you my email address in case you have doubts remaining. You can always mail to me. Most of the factual portions which will be there in this document, I'll let you know what all to read, what is important for prelims. Most of the topics I'll discuss the concepts behind it. Have you seen the previous year papers on economics? Most of the questions are not directly current affairs, but they are driving something out of current affairs. They're mostly conceptual questions. They'll pick out certain terms and they ask you about the trends or the meaning of those terms. Few questions are your fact related, which we are going to, I'll tell you what all the probability of the questions is. Any doubts here? Let's start with the first topic. Everyone has the document? The first topic is your GDP GVA mismatch. So before going into the details here, what exactly it is trying to say. What exactly do you understand by GDP? So basically most of your basic terms will be revised here. Conceptually we'll revise whatever basics you have learned. I hope everyone's read the basics of economics. What exactly is GDP? Total So the idea of GDP is that we are trying to estimate what the total output of an economy is. Total output, we estimate the total market value, all final goods and services in a territory in a year. These are the 4 keywords. We are trying to know the output which is produced in a particular territory in 1 year. So all final goods and services will only be counted. Intermediate raw materials will not be counted because their already value is being ascertained here. Now, GDP calculation can be done through 3 methods. You have the expenditure method, the product method or the value add, or the income method. Now, what's the basic difference between the two? I hope the circular flow, it is clear that all 3 will come out to be equal. Now, what exactly is the difference between the 3? Producer point of view and no, that is your expenditure method. I'm asking the difference between the 3, broad difference between the 3. So basically the broad difference between the 3 is at the stages at which we are calculating. One we are calculating at the factory level, that is at the factor cost. One we are calculating at the factory gate, that is at basic price, and one we are calculating in the market. So expenditure, everything happens in the market. This is why we say expenditure method will give us GDP at market price. The product method gives us the gross value added at, and the income method the gross value added at factor cost. Where, what exactly point we are seeing? Are we seeing the income to the factors of production, that is we are inside the factory, or we are at the gate of the factory, that is value added total by the factory, that is at basic price, and whether we are in the market at market price. The difference between the 3 is what explains the gap between the 3 values. There is a difference between because of the taxes and subsidies, because at the time at which we are, or at the place at which we are calculating, not time, place. So when we are inside the factory, this is my income method, because this is where I calculate my income to the factors of production. The factors of production will be employed inside a factory which are going to give me the gross value added at income side from the income method. When I reach the factory gate, that is when I do the production, this gives me the gross value added at basic price, and when this reaches the market, this is the GDP at market price. Is this clear, the difference between the three? Now how are they related? The gross value added at factor cost, this is what we achieve by from the income method. The income method gives the gross value added at factor cost, factors to the income of production or to the factors of production, that is wages, interest, profit and rent. These are the four. Now when we move from gross value added at factor cost to gross value added at basic price, what is the difference between the two, or how do we reach here? So when we are working inside the factory and the whole product is prepared at the factory gate, there would be certain production taxes which will be paid by the factory. For example, the stamp duty on land. This is something, if he is producing 1 unit, he is producing 1000 units, or he is producing 1 lakh units, there is a tax which he has to pay irrespective of what the volume of production is. Right? This will be added, then only the market, or then only the value at basic price will be estimated. Plus he might be getting certain production subsidy, which are again independent of his volume of production, whether producing 1, whether producing 500, or whether producing 1000. So both of them will be adjusted in the factor cost to give us the gross value added at basic price. I hope this is clear what exactly is the idea of production tax and production subsidy. Anyone has a doubt here? This production tax and production subsidy is something which is calculated independent of volume. Whether one product, 500,000, any number of product, independent of volume, whatever I am getting, what I am paying as production tax and what I am paying as production subsidy. Here I come to the factory gate. This is my gross value added at factor cost. This is my gross value added at basic price. Now from the gate, when I have to reach to the market, that is my GDP at market price. The price at the gate is not similar to the price at the market. One thing that is added here is the indirect tax, that is your product tax, and you might get a product subsidy. For example, the product will get a GST and the government might give a subsidy to buy the product. Both of the product taxes and product subsidies, they are volume dependent. If the manufacturer has given 10 products here and 10 are reaching the market, the GST or whatever the product taxes will be applicable on 10 number. This was independent of whatever number it was produced, because for example, if the land has certain tax or there is certain any other revenue which is paid on the land, it is irrespective how much production you do. But here number of units will decide what the tax is. So the difference between the two is, this is independent of volume and this is volume dependent, and this is where we reach the gross domestic price at market price. Now what the article says is that there is a difference between a gap between the gross value added at basic price and a gap between this. What will decide the gap between the two? The net product taxes which the government is receiving and the net product subsidy that is being given. So the gap between the gross value added at basic price and the GDP at market price is your product tax and product subsidy. The article is not talking about another gap which we call it as, sometimes your gross value added and your GDP might also have a difference irrespective of the product tax and product subsidy. ये ऐड करने के बाद, सब्ट्रैक्ट करने के बाद भी इनमें कुछ गैप हो सकता है. दैट इज बिकॉज आवर कलेक्शन ऑफ डेटा इन द मार्केट इज नॉट प्रॉपर. There is certain expenditures which are happening in the market for which the government can't account for in this method. Therefore, we have a adjustment figure which we call as discrepancies. This is something which happens every year because of the issues in data collection at both points. Right now, what the gap is because of the product tax and product subsidy. ये discrepancies एक accounting error है. So this is not the reason for the gap. This happens every year. There is a certain accounting error when we calculate the GDP through these two methods. So the gap is not an accounting error. The gap is because of the high amount of tax or less subsidies, which is creating a gap between the two. Is this clear? The GDP GVA gap. In India, we calculate GDP through what method? Which method is used in India for calculation of GDP? This is the method which we use. India's GDP is calculated through the product method. This is what we give the GDP, that is your gross value added at basic price. And for this, how is gross value added? The product method decides the gross value added. Total output. So we calculate the value added by each firm. Summation of value added by each firm is what will be give me the value added by all firms in the market. So what exactly is the value added by one firm? How do we calculate this? Final. This is the total sales. The sales done by the firm minus the value of intermediate. Is this the value add only? The total sales minus the, there would be certain material which is also not sold. Something you sell, something you can't sell. Minus the cost of intermediary is the value added of one firm. When you estimate it for all firms in the economy, this gives us the gross value added at basic price. I hope this is clear. For this, India's economy is divided into three sectors, that is industry and services. So now if you have to calculate the value added out of each firm, you will have to divide the whole economy in different sectors. What is the basis for separation of these three? Why we separated into agriculture, industry and services? Nature of activity. What is the nature of activity difference? What is primary, secondary, tertiary? Industry doesn't use raw material. So manufacturing doesn't use raw material. Value addition. Zero cost. Why is it zero cost? Is it not scarce? So is the raw material not converted into finished good in agriculture? The whole idea is not raw material, the raw material here is natural. This is the difference between agriculture and industry. The raw material here is natural. You work on natural raw materials to process into certain goods. This is your whole synthetic. You use those natural raw materials to produce certain activity, value addition. And this is what? What is services? What's the difference between industry and services? Intangible. So, tangible and intangible, that is it. Intangible ki definition is invisible. So the idea services is something which improves the production process in agriculture and industries. It's the knowledge sector, the tertiary sector, which improves the processes of agriculture and industry. This is production, this is working on the raw material. That is primary sector. So India has divided into three subsectors, out of which these are the total sectors. Your agriculture, forestry and fishing. This is your agriculture sector. This is what is included in agriculture. Agriculture, forestry and fishing activities. Mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas, water supply, these three, and these four are included in industry. One thing to clarify here, mining and quarrying is a primary sector activity, but this is included in industry in India. Mining, quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas, water supply, and construction. These four are classified under industry. Your public administration, financial, real estate, and trade, hotels, communication. This ABC is your services sector. 1, 2, 3, 4 are your industry. Be careful, mining and quarrying primary hai, but industry mein include karta hai India. This is working on natural raw materials. This is what is agriculture, forestry, and fishing is agriculture sector. Agriculture, this is called as agriculture and allied sector. How much of percentage of GDP in India comes from agriculture? 17 to 18%. From industry? 25-27%. See, manufacturing and industry, don't confuse. This is roughly 16%. 15 to 16%. Industry is roughly 27%. And rest is 55% is roughly services. One more thing to note down here, this construction is included in industry as per the government estimates. There are GDP estimates given by RBI also. Under that classification, construction is part of service. That is why you will find a small difference between RBI's industry contribution to GDP and service contribution to GDP, because RBI doesn't include construction in industry, it includes construction in services. Now if the question comes in paper, construction is part of what subsector, we are going to use the government estimates. The budget and the economic survey mention construction under industry. So we are using the government estimates. RBI, if by chance there's a question, RBI uses construction under services. Also mining and quarrying, though it is a primary sector, it is included under industry. Who calculates GDP in India? CSO is now merged with the NSSO, and this is called as the NSO. We have two types of estimates. One is the quarterly estimates and other is yearly. I hope this is clear, and why there is a mismatch between GDP and GVA. What's the base year for GDP in India? 2011. The methodology was changed in 2015. I hope it is clear what methodology. I think UPSC mains has asked this question. Human Development Report. One thing to note here, this, what exactly do you understand by green GDP? What is green GDP? Accounting for impact on environment. The gross domestic product, which is adjusted for the impact on environment, is your green GDP. The first state in India to measure gross economic environment product. What is gross environment product? There are certain ecosystem services. The environment or the ecology provided certain services to the human population. These ecosystem services are given a monetary value. This is what is referred to as the gross environment product. Sometimes you can have definition type questions. So there is a small difference between green GDP and the gross environment product. Uttarakhand became the first state to measure this in India. to measure the gross environment product, that is monetary value to the ecosystems which are provided by the environment or ecology. This is your gross environment product, where your GDP is adjusted for its impact on environment. How much it degrades the environment, how much of the value of the environment is degraded. This is called as your green GDP. Depletion of resources, pollution, all these things are accounted for in green GDP. Here we are measuring the ecosystem services. This is the difference between green GDP and the green ecosystem services, the gross ecosystem services. Human Development Report. The findings are not important. The concept here is, what exactly is human development? Or first, what is the difference between mostly economic development and human development? I hope the first topic is clear, GDP, GVA. What is the difference between these three terms? Already UPSC has asked a lot of questions on these three terms. Qualitative, quantitative, what exactly it is? Is economic development not quantitative? So what's the difference between all three, apart from measured? Social development, quality of life, standard of living. Standard of living is not growth. Why? Income बढ़ेगी, standard of living नहीं बढ़ेगी. In fact, growth से ही तो standard of living आएगा. So production of good and service, if growth is happening. What exactly is growth? In economic terms, it is only our expansion of output. Output is what we measure through GDP. The whole idea of economics is that resources are converted into goods and service, because ultimate utility, that is satisfaction, comes from this and not this. This is what your production activity is. Converting resource into final goods and service, which is nothing but creation of utility, which is nothing but satisfaction of resources are limited. We convert them into good and service which provide us utility or satisfaction of wants. इसी को measure करना is what our output, that is GDP. Right? If we expand to more goods and services, this is what we call as growth. Expansion of these goods and services, that is expansion of utility in monetary terms, is growth. So are we not expansion of output is not leading to increase of standard of living? Why? Is money not directly related to your standard of living? Huh? So we don't know about distribution effect. So that is, we keep distribution effect for a while side. Otherwise, don't you think income is directly related to standard of living? Not sufficient. What is sufficient? So what is the difference between growth and economic development? You are giving me extra things. I'm just asking you the difference है. हो सकता है कि ये हो negative growth हो but developed हो country, that can happen. But what exactly do you mean by economic development? Multidimensional how? Wider connotation how? Skill building. No, economic development and human development is what you are saying is education. Expansion in money and wealth तो हो रहा है यहाँ पे. Per capita, just divide by population, per capita आ जाएगा यहाँ पे. Participation, okay. One factor could be participation के किस किस को मिल रहा है. Inclusive. Then what exactly is economic development? Participation and distribution, that is inclusive growth. सबका साथ. Technology. Yes, now we are talking. Growth and economic development are related to technology. For example, if you have country X and country Y has a good level of infrastructure, has good level of technology, its institutions are well developed. Country X is devoid of these things, but country X has found certain natural resource and now is clocking a growth percentage of 8 to 10%. This country has all the things, but its growth percentage is only 1 to 2%. This has gotten certain natural resource. For example, Saudi Arabia, it has got a new oil reserve and now the growth percentages are 8 to 10%. This is your USA. Infrastructure is very good. They have the highest level of technology and the best institutions. But they are clocking 1 to 2%. So what exactly is different? Choices. ICOR. ICOR is conversion of what? What is ICOR? How well you are converting your capital into this. So now if these two countries, which of the countries we'll say is more developed? So on what basis are we deciding developed? More avenues. See, the basic thing, first about economic development is your population is employed in what sector, from where is the growth coming. You have three sectors, that is primary, industry, and why should the countries move from here to here to here? If we measure the level of growth, you know, the curve for these will be, as GDP increases, the percentage population in agriculture should increase or decrease. In industry, it increases first, then decreases, because your industry, the technology reaches the maximum. When the technology will reach the maximum, people will have the highest wages. Now you can't compete with other countries, therefore your number of people will come down. And for services, why? More opportunities. Okay. Focus. The whole point why we say if the country has to move in this direction, then only structural transformation happens. Country should shift its population from agriculture to industry to services. Why can't the country just not remain its primary services only? Where? In both these sectors, why we say that this transition should happen? Because you have the difference in productivity. If you consider the agriculture sector or the primary sector, what are the number of activities you can do in agriculture sector? You can grow crops, food, shift to cash, and have livestock. These are the activities which you can do. Beyond this, can you do any other activity here? So agriculture has an inherent problem that the productivity growth in agriculture will be low. Beyond a point, you will not be able to increase the productivity. If you will not be able to increase the productivity, your incomes in agriculture will be stagnant, because it has a very big limitation, that is productivity cannot enhance beyond a point. You can start with, agriculture starts with food. Food may maximum productivity, you can shift to another lucrative activity, that is cash crops. Then you can combine it with livestock. Beyond a point, you cannot improve the productivity in these two. The maximum amount of technology, cash crops, you will have, for example, genetically modified crops. Uske alawa to you can't do anything. Plus livestock also, you can't be, after hybrid cows, you can't have more and more milk production. But industry and services do not have such limitations. Both offer very high productivity gains. If they offer very high productive gains, that is where your income will rise. This is the difference between growth and development. This country might get the growth because of the abundant natural resource. But if most of its players are engaged in the natural resource sectors only, they are going to reach a maximum. Beyond that, they will not be able to grow. So the basic difference between growth and economic development is what type of activities is the economy engaged in. Whether it is engaged in primary activities or secondary and tertiary. So difference between one is that what exactly is the structure of the economy. That is, what is the percentage of population in primary, secondary and tertiary, and what is the percentage of GDP coming from these three sectors. So your income share and your sectoral growth, this is what determines whether the economy is developed or not. Now, how can you make this transition from these three sectors, from primary to secondary to tertiary? Investments in improving your productive capacities. And how do you improve your productive capacities? Through your technology. Technology is what will make the transition from primary to secondary to tertiary. If you don't have the technology, this transformation will not happen. Along with the productive capacities, that is your technology, what else would you need? Skilled is part of technology. R&D, machines mein kahan se aayega? Both machines and labor. Capital and labor is what will do. This productive technology is coming from both the idea plus the money is what is going to give you the technology. What else? What else would be required to do this structural transformation? What does entrepreneurship do? Ideas. What else? Land में क्या change कर सकते हो? So factors of production, उसकी आप capacity बढ़ा रहे हो technology से, right? How is land being utilized? Land was utilized first for agriculture. Now land has to shift to industry and services. So you're changing the pattern of usage of land. Market. So what exactly does an entrepreneur do? Innovation of ideas, skill. What else? Arranges. The most important thing is organizational capacity. How exactly is your work organized in a factory? You know, the first industrial revolution came based on what? The Taylor's scientific management principles and the Fowl's idea of a factory. Combine it with the Ford's principle of movement in the factory, assembly line. This is what brought in the first industrial revolution. It's not just the technology, but also how you use all the technology in the factory. This is what productive capacities and organizational capacity is going to bring in the structural transformation. From where is your GDP coming and where are your population organized? Both of these factors determine whether you are a developed country or not. This is what determines development. Percentage of population should be in higher productive activities, that is secondary and tertiary, and percentage of GDP should come from these two activities. Very less number of people should be here and less GDP should be coming from here. That is why India is not developed, because India's maximum population is engaged in 45% of the population is here and percentage GDP is only 18%. The whole difference between growth is only expansion of output. अब expansion of output तो natural resource मिल गई उससे भी हो जाएगा. But where exactly, what type of activities you are doing, that is your structural transformation. And this is based on your productive capacity and your organizational capacity. This is the difference between growth and economic development. You say this country is developed as compared to this, despite India having 7%, 8% growth, US having 2% growth. Still we say US is more developed because of the level of productive capacities and the organizational capacities they have. If you see, organizational capacity also plays a very big role. It started with the Ford's assembly line and then shifted to just in time. This is how your manufacturing production increased. Now we are seeing the whole data-based models, software as service. This is the organizational capacity where we have reached. Now we have the fourth industrial revolution, which is on the back of digital technologies. Everything is being driven through data. Decision making is happening through data, the artificial intelligence. This is how organizational capacity is very important, not just having the technology. How exactly are you organizing the work? Organization is as important as production capacities. Is this clear what is development? Now, this was your initial idea of growth and economic development. This is the initial difference between growth and economic development. The second, first, this is how after 1945 this paradigm changed, that countries should not just focus on growth, they should also focus on economic development. This is why for economic development they just don't need the ideas, that is your technology, they also need institutions. On a country wide, agar ye sab cheez chahiye, organizational skills chahiye and production capacity. One is you would need the ideas and the technology, and you would also need the institutions. Stable, what exactly is the role of institutions? To produce new ideas, wo to aa gaye na. Stability, in what form? Systematic, how? This is the role of state. What should the role of state be? What is the role of institution? Regulation. What else? See, first form of the institutions is to provide certain stability. How do the institutions provide stability? Accountability, not that. Stability. Stability comes in from stabilizing the macroeconomy. For example, controlling the inflation, managing the fiscal deficit, stabilize the market by not having very high inflations or very high fiscal deficit. What is the implication of high fiscal deficit? Crowding out of the private sector. If the government itself is borrowing more, that means you are crowding out the private sector. So you stabilize the whole economy by managing inflation and fiscal deficit, and also managing your balance of payment. On top of that, you also, the institutions create facilities. What type of facilities? Infrastructure. This is the most important thing which will provide economic development. Without infrastructure, you are not going to get that. This is the role of institutions or the role of state. Provide infrastructure, provide the basic law and order, provide the adjudication function. So if there is a fight between two producers, you need to have a contract enforcement mechanism. Without stability, you will never have growth or development. So not just stabilize, create facilities, also institutions can provide you. Ease of doing business will be based on these factors itself. And policy in terms of this is development of the social infrastructure. So this is how your economic development, this is how your growth will be translated into economic development. And this is what will bring in more growth. This is what is expansion of human choices for a longer duration. Growth simply means expansion of output. Economic development is a more broader term which is increasing the productive capacities, organizational capacities, which will lead to structural transformation. Is this clear, the difference between growth and economic development? Now this is the first domain till 1970s. What was thought that this is what is required for the countries to get economic development. One of the problems with this type of an approach was that what about the distribution of this growth? This is where the debates on inequality could have various dimensions. Poverty, inequality and unemployment. Now a country might have good growth and also might be developed, but at the same time can have this. For example, India has a huge number of poverty, has huge inequality, and also unemployment numbers, though not very high, the quality of employment is not good. So this, while having all these, having the technology, having the institutions, you might still have all of these. Now will you say the economy is developed if distribution of growth is not considered? So therefore economic development also has to take into account the distributional effects. Taking distribution of growth into consideration and expanding beyond. Now if you see this paradigm of economic development, it is only talking about a sustained growth for a long duration of time. So if you provide all of this, you are going to have a good standard of living. People are going to be employed in better economic activities as compared to primary sector, right? So this whole idea of economic development is talking about expansion of only one choice, that is income. Growth ये बोल रहा था expansion of output होगा, but it might be short lived. We will say economic development when productive activities में है, income should be increasing. But at the end of the day, we are just talking about increase in income. Even if you are talking about the distributional effects, poverty, inequality, unemployment, this is again talking about just income. Because poverty is a factor of income. Your inequality is also income or wealth, again a factor of economic prosperity, that is income, or unemployment again. What is unemployment? Or what is employment? What is employment? People are willing and they are getting. Employment is a function of production. So if production activity will happen, job will be created. So employment is creation of production activity, a function of production activity. So we are all talking about income. Now comes the concept, what are you going to do with this income? What exactly is the use of this income? Even when we are saying कि develop हो गई economy, poverty, inequality, unemployment भी हटा दिया, then also can we say that the economy is developed, or whether we have development in a holistic manner? It all depends on what the functioning of this income is, that what exactly are you able to do with that income. This is where we have the concept of human development. Development talks about expansion of only one choice, that is income. Human development is more comprehensive. It talks about expansion of all types of choices apart from income. What exactly are you doing with this income will depend on what? What exactly can you do with this income will depend on what? Consumption criteria. What is that? Do you understand that how economic development is only centered around income? Now we want to know what exactly are we doing with that income. People have the iPhone but don't know what to do with the iPhone. What on one factor will depend what you know, what you can do with the iPhone. Education. What is standard of living? Standard of living comes with, standard of living is what? Access to more goods. If someone has a car, someone has a TV, someone has a fridge, someone has an AC, you will say he has better standard of living apart from a person who doesn't have these. So standard of living is just decided on the number of goods you can accumulate. Now the question is, what are we doing with that good? Whether we know how to use that good or not. This is where the concept comes of the capability you have. Now capability will depend on a lot of factors. Capability will depend on your social development. Capability will depend on your political development, will also depend on your whether it is sustainable or not. This is why human development is a more comprehensive concept which talks about the capability also. That what exactly are you going to do with the income? It is not just talking about distribution effect. Distribution effect is important. Every human should get that choice, but not just income choice. Choice should be multiple. For example, social freedom, political freedom, even ecological, to enjoy leisure. For example, enjoying good air, having free spaces. अब उसके लिए income ज़रूरी है. Even when you don't have income, you should be able to enjoy the nature. Because for someone, income could be everything. For someone, income could be nothing. You can't say he is more developed as compared to him. So the whole thing centers around the capability you are giving. This is why human development is a more comprehensive concept as compared to economic development. Economic development in the broader sense talks only about distribution and productive capacities. When we talk about moving beyond income is when we talk about human development. Expanding all choices. Economic development says expanding only one choice, that is income. Expanding all choice, political freedom, social participation, gender equality, all types of social empowerment, sustainable, ecologically, you should be getting all benefits. So this is more comprehensive. It is not that not just income, incomes are beyond. This is why human development has 4 basic criterias, 4 basic features. One is the feature of equity. That is, it should be available to all. Distribution effects. Sustainability. When it talks about equity, it is talking about the intra-generational distribution. Sustainability also talks about the intergenerational distribution. That the benefits should not just be enjoyed by this generation but by the next generation also. So equity, sustainability, then comes your productivity, which is nothing but the capability you provide, providing education, healthcare, the basic skills so that people can decide what they want. And they should not be dependent on someone to get it. They should have the opportunity to make their own choices. These are the 4 features of human development. It should be equitable, sustainable, productive, that is providing capability to all, and empowering them. Capability and empowerment are linked. You provide capability to someone, you empower them. You are not making them dependent on the state for things. This is why we say human development, government support, for example, is coming in the form of PDS. This is a dependency approach. That you are dependent on the government for the grains. The empowerment approach says you should have the skill to work and earn that grain. This is why one of the most important thing is, apart from capability, you also need to provide the, then only people will be empowered in the true sense. And empowerment is not just economic empowerment, social empowerment and political empowerment also. The whole idea of empowerment is that people should be free to make their own choices. This is the difference between growth, economic development and human development. Is this clear? This is why if you see, is different. क्या नहीं दिख रहा? Human development is defined as the process of enlarging people's freedoms and opportunities and improving their well-being. This is the 4 factors if you consider. This is enlargement of choices. Not just income choice but all types of choices. Enlarging people's freedoms and opportunities. Not just income opportunities, all types of opportunities. This is the definition of human development. Is this clear? The Human Development Report has 3 indices or 3 major factors which it considers as the 3 key dimensions. One is the health, the other is access to knowledge, and the other is income. So 3 dimensions according to the UNDP report. The UNDP report, the Human Development Index of the UNDP report, health, education and the standard of living, which is measured through per capita income. These 4 indices are important. You can get the definitions here. The inequality adjusted is achievements of country across this. It is according to the income percentile. Har income percentile mein what exactly is the achievement on all 3. This is what is measured by inequality adjusted human development index. Not every percentile of income will have the same access to these 3. So this is your inequality. Gender Development Index or GDI, it measures the HDI for males as compared to HDI for females. Gender Inequality Index, inequality to 3 dimensions. It has three different indices: reproductive health, empowerment, and labor market participation. This index is completely different. The gender inequality index measures the participation of access of women to reproductive health, empowerment, all types of empowerment, and opportunities in the labor market. These two are on the same index, that is your health, education, and income. And then you have multidimensional poverty index. This is what we'll discuss in a while. I hope these three indexes are clear. Everything is a part of Human Development Report, a part of UNDP's HDR. 1990 for the first time computed by World Bank, Mehboob Haq and Amartya Sen. Is this clear, the concept of human development? So you can divide the whole percentage of whole population into different income percentile, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, their values of HDI. So what is the access to long and healthy life through life expectancy of the people in the income 10 to 20. This is what is measured through inequality adjusted, because every income level 0 to 10, 10 to 20 will have different as compared to this. You will have a better overview of HDI. Gender development is just male is to female ratio. Gender inequality index is three different factors: access of women to these services. This determines gender inequality index. It is not related to this. Where? See, based on the factors, health and education could be better as compared to income. Ek to population is very less. Is this clear? The figures would not be very important here. For mains it might be. The factors. Something about the UNDP established in 1965. End poverty. What are the three functions? Poverty, democratic governance, rule of law, and inclusive institutions. Now you can relate why economic development would want democratic governance, institutions, rule of law, and inclusive institutions. The whole reason of building UNDP was this only, that growth has to be moved to economic development, जिसके लिए आपको stability चाहिए होगी. You will have to build democratic governance and institutions. This is the role of the state. India is one of the members. Sustainable development, democratic governance, climate and disaster resilience. These are the three major focus areas. Is it clear, human development? Any doubts here? Next is poverty elevation, poverty estimates. Mostly this topic is important for mains, but still given here. How do we estimate poverty in India? I'll just give you a brief overview why this whole debate has started. This is your two studies have come from, one from IMF and the other of World Bank, on the poverty estimates, that is the reduction of extreme poverty in India. Now, why two different studies and why they are contradicting results? If you see the results which both show, according to the World Bank study in 2011, it was 22.5. It has reduced from 22.5 to 10.2. According to IMF, it has reduced from 10.8 to 1.3. So, very vast different result. Both say it has reduced. 22 to 10, 10 to 1. But the magnitude is very wide. It's very different. Both say that India has reduced extreme poverty, but the magnitude of the numbers are different. Now, why this has happened? Why their magnitude of numbers is different? How do we calculate poverty in India? Poverty estimates in India are based on consumption, expenditure. It's not based on income. Poverty in India is not based on income. Poverty in India is based on consumption expenditure. Consumption expenditure on what? On the basic goods. Who computes these basket of goods and who says how much expenditure should be there? And is there only goods or services also? Does India use behavioral indicators? It's not. There are but this basket of goods and services, and how much expenditure should be happening on this. This is called as your poverty line basket. If anyone is spending below the consumption expenditure which we deem minimum for this basket, is spending below than that, is poor, right? Basket एक डिसाइड होती है, उस पे कितना consumption expenditure minimum होना चाहिए. Now this is decided by certain expert committees which are set up by the government from time to time. The committee which we have accepted is the Tendulkar committee. Tendulkar committee not only has basket of goods, that is the basic goods that are required, but also has certain services, that is health and education. This is what your Tendulkar committee had the basket. This was slightly, the basket was enlarged by the Rangarajan committee, which also included certain behavioral factors. This had goods and certain services such as health, education, the private expenditure which a person does on health and education. Rangarajan had goods. It also expanded the services. It included health, education, housing, transportation, and a lot of other services. Plus, it also said that there is certain behavioral expenditures which people do. For example, alcohol consumption. For example, dish TV. Entertainment purpose के लिए भी कुछ expenditure होता which should be included in the basket. So this basket was slightly advanced than Tendulkar's basket. Tendulkar basket was only one. It was not separate for rural and urban. It had separate basket for rural and urban. And for getting the data, it used a modified recall period. Basically, for calculation of data here, before Tendulkar, the method used was uniform recall period, where every data or every consumption expenditure was taken with the same frequency. But what Tendulkar said is some goods and services are used more frequently as compared to others. For example, food items पे expenditure ज़्यादा है, frequent ज़्यादा है as compared to say non-food items. What? Footwear, clothing. This is not something people buy regularly. So for that we can have a recall period of longer duration. For food we can have a recall period of shorter duration because वो जल्दी frequency ज़्यादा है. He also used, he had a mixed modified recall period. इसने एक और criteria बनाया. Some goods are used all the more. 7, 30, 365. This is how the recall period was. This was not accepted by the government. In India, we still compute on the methodology given by Tendulkar. This data of consumption expenditure comes from the NSOS's consumption expenditure survey. So the idea of poverty estimation in India is that we do it on a consumption basket, based on a basket of goods, the poverty line basket. Who decides how much expenditure, and the basket is decided by an expert committee. We set up two recent committees, Tendulkar and Rangarajan. Rangarajan was not accepted, Tendulkar was accepted. And the data on poverty in India periodically comes from the NSSO's consumption expenditure survey, which is conducted every 5 years. This is the basics of poverty line estimation in India. We estimate. So when you are measuring the consumption expenditure जो basket पे है, do you think all the goods which they are consuming are we consuming with the same frequency? For example, the expenditure they do on food and expenditure they do on cloth, the frequency would be the same. So under the uniform recall period, हम सबका data एक ही time period पे लेते हैं for how much expenditure they are doing in say 365 days. What Tendulkar said is that food is consumed every 30 days. So the consumption expenditure on food is changing frequently, but consumption expenditure on cloth does not change within 1 year. So we need to have a modified recall period. Food के लिए data हम हर 30 days पे देखेंगे और cloth के लिए हम 1 साल पे. He said food में भी कुछ items ज़्यादा जल्दी use होती हैं, उनके लिए 7 days. rest items 30 days, remaining items 365 days. This was, no, you will take a survey, how much is expenditure is happening. ये पूरा survey का time period होगा ना कि कब कब लेगा डेटा. 5 साल में एक बार हो रहा है, पर डेटा कलेक्शन पॉइंट्स तो अलग हो सकते हैं कि 30 डेज में, फॉर एग्जांपल जनवरी में फूड में कितना खर्च किया था, फरवरी में कितना खर्च किया था, राइट? क्लॉथ का पूरे साल में कितना किया था वो बताओ. So this is what the average, because see, for example, under the modified recall period, you are talking about लास्ट 1 ईयर में आपने फूड पे कितना किया था और क्लॉथ पे कितना किया था. नाउ अंडर मॉडिफाइड रिकॉल पीरियड आई विल आस्क यू लास्ट 1 मंथ में आपने फूड पे क्या किया था और लास्ट 1 ईयर में क्लॉथ पे क्या किया था. तो रिकॉल पीरियड इज डिफरेंट. सिमिलरली मिक्स्ड मॉडिफाइड में एक और टाइम पीरियड डाला 7, 30 एंड 365. दिस इज बेटर मेथड फॉर कलेक्शन ऑफ डेटा. सो नाउ Tendulkar committee is what is accepted. The data for this whole methodology comes from the NSSO's consumption expenditure survey. The NSSO consumption expenditure survey, the last time it happened was 2011-12. The same thing had to happen in 2017 and it was conducted also. But the government rejected this data. The government rejected this data. Poverty 4% बढ़ गई थी under this data, whatever was leaked. But we are not going to do that. 2017 का consumption expenditure survey was junked because of data quality issues. The whole body of structure of NSSO is that you have NSSO and you have, और उनके ऊपर एक regulator है, the National Statistical Commission. So this is the regulatory structure. They collect the data and NSC keeps an overview whether they are using the right methodologies or not. This report of 2017 was approved by NSC also, but the government did not accept it. And after this, the government merged these two and formed the NSO. So now the problem is the last data on poverty in India is 2011-12. Tendulkar ki methodology pe, the last data on poverty is 2011-12, according to which poverty in India is roughly 21%. This is the last we know of poverty in India. This head count ratio in India is 21%, we know of 2011-12 only. Now problem is if 17 data was not there, we don't know what exactly is the head count ratio in India. Now for this, two things happened. There were two papers, one from the IMF and the other from the World Bank. The methodologies were different, that is why the numbers are also different. Since there was no consumption expenditure data of 2017, the IMF used the national accounts. In measurement of GDP, when we measure GDP through expenditure method, this is how we do it. The expenditure of different actors. This is what? Private final consumption expenditure. So what they have done is they have used this number to compute the consumption expenditure in India, based on which they have calculated the poverty numbers. World Bank on the other hand has used, there is a private body which also does this number estimation, which is called as Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. This is a private organization which tries to compute numbers on employment, on poverty, on a range of different Indian economic factors. It will give number. इनका एक consumer pyramid है. This is the survey which they call the Consumer Pyramid Household Survey. This is what the World Bank used for computing the data, and IMF used the private final consumption expenditure. This is the reason we have got different numbers for both. Methodology में दोनों की problem है, because you can't say private final expenditure, we can't know the unit analysis के हर घर का कितना expenditure होगा, ये this can give us a wrong figure. Similarly, this data is also not very highly representative. So both have methodological issues. This is why the whole controversy erupted कि IMF ने बोला इतनी कम poverty है and World Bank was still saying high. It is reduced, but it still is high. Another thing which the IMF did was, they not only used private final consumption expenditure, they also estimated that if we assume that people are getting grain from PDS, then what will be the number of poverty? ये assumption था उनका कि PDS का grain उनको मिल रहा है. That means people don't have to do expenditure on food. This is why the numbers from IMF were very low, because they accounted also for the food transfers which are given from the government. Assuming that this expenditure is not to be done by the people, ये तो government ने ही provide कर दिया है. This is why this number, this data by IMF was heavily criticized. Extreme poverty in India 22.2 to 10. This is 10 to 1.3. Now extreme poverty rate in India, food transfers are factored in. IMF paper factored in the food transfers. This is the poverty estimate debate which happened last year. Which one? Do you think IMF methodology, PDS, is the only grain which people are using? Is PDS grain the only food expenditure people are doing? So it said this is the only food expenditure of people. That is why its poverty numbers, see how less they are. Because extreme poverty as per the world definition, World Bank definition is $1.9. $1.9 on purchasing power parity. The exchange rate is not market, it is purchasing power parity, जो काफ़ी कम है. तो वो उनका expenditure फिर कम होगा. तो इसीलिए number of poor people will be less. Because you are already estimating कि food expenditure is only PDS, जो already government कर रहा है. This is why their number is very low. World Bank said हो रहा है less, but it is not that less. This is why we don't have a number. Now 2022 is when the government has announced it has started the consumption expenditure survey again. 17 वाला reject किया था quality issues के लिए, 2002 में दोबारा start किया है. But till then we don't have official head count ratio numbers from India. This is not official. This is just a World Bank study and an IMF study. Last number in India is only 21%. That is the Tendulkar committee. 21.9% was below poverty line based on the methodology of Tendulkar. Rangarajan committee was not accepted. Is this clear? Poverty line estimates the difference between World Bank and IMF. Now one of the things that is where poverty has moved in, poverty according to the multidimensional poverty index. Now these two indices, that is Tendulkar committee or Rangarajan committee, they talk about poverty based on only this is the definition of poverty. If someone doing less than their consumption expenditure is termed to be as poor. We don't know on what factors it is being deprived. The only thing we know is that ये consumption expenditure की line है, इसके नीचे जितने लोग हैं वो poor हैं. Now this is a highly reductive methodology. We're just saying जिसका consumption expenditure below this is poor. We don't know what exactly is the state of poor here. We don't know their extent of poverty. They are deprived on what all indicators? We are having no idea about their deprivation on a range of indicators. Because if we see the definition of human development now, is it only the expansion of income? It is expansion of range of choices. तो अगर poverty भी देखनी है सिर्फ वो income या expenditure पे नहीं होना चाहिए. Poverty should be on range of choices. And this is why we will measure the deprivation of people on these choices. The whole idea of economic development was that everybody should have income. This is what we said कि distribution effects ठीक कर दो. Poverty, unemployment, inequality. So if you give enough expenditure, that is enough income so that they can do the expenditure, would it mean that they are not poor? Human development would still say they are poor, because it will depend on what all choices they have, not just income choices. This is why we now measure the deprivation of people across different choices. This is where we have the concept of the multidimensional poverty index. The whole idea of development when expanded from, this is why human development report ने ही multidimensional poverty index की बात की. That poverty would not just be the absence of income or consumption expenditure. poverty would be wider. We have to check deprivation on a range of factors. This is what will term the people as poor. This is where you have the concept of the multidimensional poverty index. Now, what are the indicators of multidimensional poverty index? This is the total 10 indicators where it measures the deprivations. Health, education and living standards. For health, it undertakes nutrition and child mortality. For education, years of schooling and school attendance. For living standards, cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing and access to assets. What are assets? Property. Is gold not an asset? Investment. What is investment? Capital formation. Asset क्या होता है फिर? Land. This is an example of asset. Shares could be an asset. Gold is asset. Something which generates income in future. This is asset. Investment is increase in assets. Capital formation, capital goods. Something which will generate income in future. This is asset. Now, why is asset included here? Why is asset? Other things you can relate. Why is asset? Wealth. So why do you need wealth? Measuring of नहीं क्यों बनाई है यही तो पूछ रहे हैं कि यहाँ क्यों रखा है एसेट नहीं ऐसा कांस्टेंट सो why would you want an asset to measure deprivation? This is an insurance, this is your social security. If there is inflation, asset protects you against inflation. If there is an accident, you have an asset. This is your social security that in case of exigencies or any emergencies, unforeseen circumstances, you have an income generating asset. It becomes all the more important as a guard against inflation, because inflation hurts the poor the most because they don't have an asset against it. Rich have an asset because if inflation is happening, oh asset price bhi बढ़ रहा है, which is a guard against inflation. If poor don't have this asset, they don't have any guard against inflation because most of the money they are holding in cash. So their value of money is going down. This is a guard, this is a social security. So this is why this is your total 10 indicators of multidimensional poverty index. Multidimensional poverty index not only measures the extent, it also measures the incidence. Both are being measured here. Your poverty estimates on consumption expenditure was just talking about the incidence, that is how many number of when we were discussing the multidimensional poverty or the consumption expenditure or even income, it is whatever you are earning below this level. That means how many percentage here. This is what is incidence of poverty. कितने लोग ऊपर हैं, कितने लोग कम हैं, ये incidence है. MPI also tells the extent. This poor is different from this poor. Poverty line ये नहीं बता सकती. For poverty line, all are poor, whether you are here, whether you are here. How can MPI tell you this intensity, the difference between the two? If any three, that is incidence. अगर if any three पे आप poor हो तो आप नीचे आ जाओगे इधर. So now when I am measuring across 10 deprivation indicators, तो इसकी deprivation अलग होगी इससे. Therefore I will come to know the intensity. So MPI is a measure, better measure of poverty because it is not just measuring incidence but it is also measuring intensity. There are two major differences between a poverty line based on income or consumption expenditure and MPI. First, MPI is more holistic. It talks about deprivation across different indicators, not just income. That is why it is related to the concept of human development. And it also measures the extent or intensity of poverty of an individual. 10 indicators. First, what is important? UNDP, Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. These are the two bodies which publish MPI every year. This can be a question in prelims. These are the 10 indicators. Again, indicators are important. Already UPSC has asked question in prelims on indicators. World Bank Ease of Doing Business के indicators पूछे थे. So these indicators are important. And one more thing to remember here, global MPI और Indian MPI के indicators different है. How does it measure? H is the incident, A is the proportion of people with number of deprivations. H into A is what your MPI number is. A person is identified as vulnerable to poverty if they are deprived in 1/3 of the indicators. If a person is severe poverty, if more than 50% of the indicators. 5 से ज़्यादा पे deprived हैं तो it is severe poverty. Vulnerable to poverty when 1/3 of the indicators. India also has a national multi-dimensional poverty index. This national multi-dimensional poverty index is published by Niti Aayog. And what is the baseline data? किस data पे we do it? How does it calculate the data? ये जो indicators के data हैं, for example, this is your indicators: health, nutrition, child and adolescent mortality, and antenatal care. Antenatal care was not a measure in global. Rest are the same: years of schooling, school attendance, cooking food, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, assets, and a bank account. Bank account was not a measure of global MPI. So two factors, two indicators are different: antenatal care and this. From where does it get the baseline data for all this? It is the NFHS 5. The last was calculated on NFHS 5. The multi-dimensional poverty index in 2020-21 by Niti Aayog is calculated on the baseline data of National Family Health Survey 5th, which is done by International Institute of Population Sciences under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. All of these information can be a question in prelims. Financial inclusion. How do you get access to any opportunity? By getting loans. For example, how do you solve poverty? Then you will understand कि ये कैसे होगा. How do you solve poverty? First, what are the government methods to target poverty? What are the different government methods of poverty alleviation? Capability approach. Does India have capability approach? Some sort of capability. But how did it start? Subsidies on what? PDS. See how poverty alleviation methods have changed in India. In the initial years, 1950 till 1975, roughly till 1967 in fact, the government approach to poverty alleviation was only, this is the approach of trickle down. I hope trickle down everybody understands. Growth at the top is going to trickle down to rest of the sections. Trickle down से growth होगी. Growth कौन करेगा? State. There were no targeted poverty programs in India. PDS also till 97 was a universal system which was available to all. There was no targeting of PDS till 97. 97 is when, that is why the PDS is now named TPDS, that is targeted PDS. So growth will be provided by the state. There is no anti-poverty programs by the government. There were two things why there was no anti-poverty programs. One, that government thought that state jab growth karegi through PSUs, heavy industry, it will not need any poverty alleviation. Secondly, we did not have the money to do any targeted programs. Targeted programs in India start with 1975, the Indira Gandhi government, and the first program is called as the minimum needs program. This is why Roti Kapda Makan. The government started providing. Now the targeted till 1985, in fact, 80-85, the idea of the government for poverty alleviation was that we need targeted programs, and these targeted programs are going to provide the basic needs to the people. And this is where this approach was followed throughout the world. Where they were providing basic needs, India was providing minimum needs. India was in nowhere any position to provide all basic needs. India was just providing the minimum needs program, plus PDS was still universal. So this is how targeted anti-poverty program in India start with MNP, that is minimum needs program. 1980-85, 6th, 7th year, 5-year plan, the government says we are not just providing basic needs, we are also going to generate employment. And employment, not just wage employment, we are also going to have services for self-employment. Now this is the domain which government has till date. The government tries to create wage employment. What is the program for wage employment now? 1985 onwards, यही एक strategy है, generate employment, either wage or self. Wage employment, the program, the primary program of the government is the Mahatma Gandhi National Employment, Rural Employment Generation. This is National Rural Employment Program से start हुआ था ये, and it extended to this. This is right now the program for wage employment. And what is it for self-employment? The whole idea of self-employment is that the government is not fit to create wage employment. हर किसी को काम नहीं दे सकते, लोगों को खुद काम देना, खुद काम करना पड़ेगा. खुद काम करने के लिए what would you need? You would need skill and you would need capital. Now this capital would be provided when you have a now you realize how poverty. बैंक अकाउंट के बिना आपके पास कभी पैसे नहीं होंगे काम शुरू करने के लिए. Because if you take money from informal money lenders, you will have to take it at a very high interest rate. This will become very difficult. जैम ट्रिनिटी का यही रोल है. बैंक अकाउंट किस लिए दिलवाया आपको? दिस इज योर फर्स्ट जनधन योजना. एंड इफ एनी अदर ट्रांसफर्स विच वी वांट टू गिव यू, सी वेज एम्प्लॉयमेंट, सेल्फ एम्प्लॉयमेंट के साथ गवर्नमेंट इज ऑल्सो सेंडिंग इन अ लॉट ऑफ बेसिक नीड्स के लिए भी गवर्नमेंट इज प्रोवाइडिंग अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल हाउसिंग, यू आर गेटिंग प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना के लिए पैसे. सो वो सारी चीजों के लिए भी ये काम आएगा जनधन अकाउंट एंड आधार प्लस मोबाइल. So along with this, there is social security provided by the government through various schemes. PDS, electricity, a lot of things. So Bhagya scheme, LPG, a lot of assets are being provided through this also. Now skill and capital, the whole idea of the government, this scheme started with, पहली scheme थी TRISEM, training of rural youth for self-employment. This is what has now extended to the major program, that is Skill India. There are different Skill India schemes. Idea is skill होगा, capital provide करो, you will get economic opportunities. For capital, in fact, this is where the government started another program which UPSC has asked twice or thrice in mains. This was your self-help group bank linkage program. This was the major strategy which the government followed under आजीविका, NRLM, National Rural Livelihood Mission. Livelihood Mission में ये strategy थी, engage people in and provide them this bank linkage. This program was run by NABARD, self-help group bank linkage program, and this is where your microfinance institutions also played a very important role. Committee, I don't remember the name, but idea ये है. Now what is the idea here? Self-help group bank linkage, that people should be getting into a group. Why not give it individually? In fact, government is also giving it to MSME. You have the Mudra scheme. Not specifically collateral. ये group के through ही क्यों है? Self-help group ही क्यों किया? Why not give it to individuals? Cooperative. Why cooperative? ये self-help group is registered as a cooperative society. Why will they give it to a group? Less risk. Why? Repayment is more in a group. Single people, there are more defaults. Repayment is more in a group. This is more likely to succeed. Just provide them the additional loan. and they will start an economic activity. Now, bank account is important for 2 points. Bank is not just for getting you the capital. Bank is also important if the government is providing all the benefits through direct benefit transfer. If the money is going to come into your account, you need to have an account first. Consider the government is also thinking about shifting PDS to DBT also. तो उसके लिए बैंक अकाउंट जरूरी है. तो access of bank account is a very important factor which will determine whether you are poor or not. Is this clear? Poverty elevation and all. So multidimensional poverty index, NFHS 5 data is what is being used to calculate it. Niti Aayog NFHS is given by Institute of Population Sciences under Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. These are the indicators. The head count ratio and the intensity is the same, incidence and intensity. This is last year data. And the performance of states. Again, this is last year. Bihar has the highest number of people with multidimensional poverty, 51.91, and the minimum is Kerala. Is this clear? What is multidimensional poverty and how we have moved from consumption expenditure to multidimensional poverty? This is what NFHS 4 or NHFS 5 का comparison ही ये multidimensional poverty दे रहा है. NHS baseline NHS 4 and the current performance NHS 5. Intensity. Now when we were calculating poverty line estimates through consumption expenditure, anyone spending below this is poor, right? Now how do you know the situation of these three? All of the three are not same. This is what is the extent or intensity of poverty. When we are measuring through consumption expenditure, we will not be able to know the extent of poverty because हमारे लिए तो इससे नीचे सारे poor हैं. We don't know the extent or intensity. So this is where the MPI helps, where we are trying to know the deprivation across indicators. Now deprivation across 10 indicators would be different from here, different for him and different for him. Based on it, we will come to know in तीनों की intensity of poverty क्या है. For example, he is missing out on only 4 factors, he is missing out on 5, he is missing out on 6. So इनकी value of A would be different. He is vulnerable, he is severely, both are severe poor. Because the deprivation across different indicators is different. 3 से कम किसी की भी deprivation है वो सारे poor हैं. फिर उनकी intensity measure के लिए आगे कितने indicators पे बहुत poor है. MPI average for all. एक एक का भी निकल आ सकता है उसमें based on the NFHS 5 data. This is your poverty line estimates. And one more thing, what exactly is socio-economic caste census? What is the role of socio-economic caste census and how it is different from headline HCR based on consumption expenditure survey? No, socio-economic caste census and headline count ratio, the head count ratio, how are they different? And why do we need both, or why can't we do this only? What exactly is socio-economic caste census? And this is based on NSSO's consumption expenditure survey. What is socio-economic caste census? Census है तो census में पर क्या होता है? It is similar to multidimensional poverty index, but we are not measuring anything because this is a just data, getting information. So there are certain socio-economic indicators based on which we are collecting information. It's just a census. ये थोड़ा widened census है because it is collecting socio-economic and also information across caste. Caste information was not made public in 2015, only socio-economic indicators. Now this is, from this only we will come to know the poverty in India. Why do we need this? Or in fact, when we have headline count ratio, Tendulkar said 21% of the people are poor in the country. How does a state target poverty? एक सर्वे से पता चला टोटल इंडिया में 21% है, बट हाउ डू वी नो ऑन द 21% विच एग्जैक्ट हाउस होल्ड इज पुअर? कैसे ढूंढोगे? Before this was happened in 2011. Before this, how we used to target poverty? PDS. PDS कैसे? PDS तो इनफैक्ट PDS को चाहिए ये चीज, क्योंकि PDS टारगेट पावर्टी 97 के बाद इट बिकेम, तो इसको तो चाहिए वो पुअर कौन है, इसको तो वो डेटा चाहिए. ये कैसे डेटा लाएगा? राशन कार्ड. हाउ डू यू गिव दैट डिफरेंट कलर राशन कार्ड? इस ये टारगेटेड पीडीएस को लिस्ट चाहिए आपके बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन पुअर की. ये टारगेट करने हैं क्योंकि एक एक घर में देना है. इनकम, डू वी कैलकुलेट आउट एन इनकम? डू यू गेट द क्वेश्चन? कि 21% पता चल गया इंडिया में है सैंपल सर्वे से. वो 21 में कौन कौन आता है? क्योंकि स्टेट को तो टारगेट करने पड़ेंगे ना वो हाउस होल्ड फॉर एनी ऑफ द स्कीम्स, बी इट आवास योजना, बी इट एनी योजना. यू विल हैव टू टारगेट, यू विल हैव टू फाइंड हु द पुअर आर. This is where the states used to conduct BPL census. With the help of the rural ministry and urban ministry, the states used to conduct BPL census. Now they are not conducting it because they have socio-economic caste census. Census is enumeration of data. The idea of this headline count ratio, it is based on sample survey. ये sample है, sample पे हमने पूरे इंडिया की estimate की value. But इससे we can't know who is the exact household. Exact household के लिए you will have to conduct a census. And based on this socio-economic caste census or the BPL census before, we used to have exclusion and inclusion criteria. ये हर state अपना खुद बनाता है. For example, it can have an exclusion criteria for someone who has say 4 electrical appliances in the house. For example, someone is an income tax payer, someone has a government job in the house. अगर ऐसे indicators पे the household is standing true, that means it is not poor. They are automatically excluded. Inclusion, for example, if someone doesn't have a pakka roof, if there is no electrical appliance in the house, these factors would mean you are automatically poor. So on these census data, we had exclusion and inclusion criteria. Every state has its own inclusion and exclusion criteria, based on which they target poverty, based on which they provide grains under targeted PDS or target poverty for any schemes. This is how poverty is targeted. When socio-economic caste census itself is used for poverty target, why are we then having HCR number? इसका क्या significance है फिर? You understood, जब ये अब एक नया फैक्टर है और इसका क्राइटेरिया भी अलग है पावर्टी का, एक्सक्लूजन एंड इंक्लूजन. यू नॉट चेकिंग ऑन कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर नाउ, देन व्हाई डू यू नीड HCR नंबर? एवरी नो, दिस इज हैपनिंग एवरी 5 years. वो तो 2017 में हुआ नहीं, बट दिस इज हैपनिंग एवरी 5 years. कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर सर्वे पे ही HCR आता है. No, why are we doing this? वो तो सब हटा दो. जब सीधा सोशो इकोनॉमिक कास्ट सेंसस, और हर स्टेट ने अपना क्राइटेरिया लगाना है, अपना बताना है पुअर कौन सा है. एंड नॉट एवरी स्टेट इज यूजिंग दिस. स्टेट्स आर कंडक्टिंग देयर ओन, यूजिंग देयर ओन डेटा ऑल्सो. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, मध्य प्रदेश हैज अ सेपरेट मैकेनिज्म अंडर द समग्र स्कीम. ये अपना इनका आइडेंटिफिकेशन प्रोग्राम है जिसके अंदर दे गिव दिस समग्र कार्ड. So when states are using their own mechanisms to find out what is the poor and also target them, why do we have this national data? The whole problem is that when we have exclusion and inclusion, this criteria, this is different for different states. The central government will never know what is the level of poverty in the country. National level पे कोई एक data नहीं होगा. So the central government would not know what type of policies to formulate if they don't know the poverty number. इसीलिए sample survey और poverty number बहुत important है. Both MPI and socio-economic caste census are better mechanisms to target poverty. But for policy purpose on the central level, you would need this. How? अमाउंट नहीं है ना यहाँ पे अब सोशो इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल इलेक्ट्रिकल अप्लायंसर और इस पे कितने हैं. What exactly one data would be? It can do. It's not difficult. It can do. But why? Because this is more easier क्योंकि policy terms में एक बड़ा broad figure है. For example, if HCR is 21% or HCR is 70%, the policy push from the central government would be different. तो हमें एक ये नंबर चाहिए कि कितने लोग पुअर हैं, उस हिसाब से अब एक पॉलिसी बनाए सेंटर लेवल पे. स्टेट अपने लेवल पे टारगेट कर सकती है इन चीजों पे. एवरी स्टेट कुड हैव डिफरेंट. So they can do it through this and this. This is why you'll see MPI में data. For example, consider this. Now this is the range of MPI performance. ऐसी सोशो इकोनॉमिक कास्ट सेंसस वही परफॉर्मेंस होगी. तो इसी हिसाब से हर स्टेट अपनी पॉलिसी बना सकती है. Now the policy push of the Bihar government would be completely different from policy push of Kerala government. Because they know they have good capability and opportunity already there. Capability, not opportunity. There the complete policy push would be different. So this is more on a state level that you can target and have your own policies. Center. They can. They definitely can. The idea is national पे level पे ये डेटा आसान है, ये कर सकते हैं, नो डाउट. एक यूनिफॉर्म डेटा जो अगर स्टेट ने हर में बनाया है तो एक सेंटर का यूनिफॉर्म बन सकता है. दे कैन, बट दिस इज व्हाट दे आर यूजिंग. दिस इज व्हाई वी आल्सो कंप्यूट अ हेडलाइन काउंट रेशियो जस्ट टू नो हाउ मेनी नंबर ऑफ पीपल आर पुअर. ये मेथड बहुत आसान है. सैंपल सर्वे, कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर और इनकम. वी यूज कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर, नॉट इनकम. दिस इज मोर टीडियस. We have not, because numbers नहीं है ना. Consumption 2017 के numbers ही नहीं हैं. But how will you exactly calculate? It will be inflation adjusted because 17 में consumption expenditure survey तो उसी year का आएगा ना, 5 years का. 11 का number है consumption expenditure, जो तेंदुलकर कमेटी से जो number आएगा वो 17 के डेटा पे आना चाहिए, अब 2022 के डेटा पे. Methodology he has given. You use the data of 11, 17, 22, 27 every 5 years. So it will definitely be inflation adjusted. क्योंकि कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर सर्वे है, वो सर्वे तो वो नंबर उसी टाइम के आएंगे. जो मेथोडोलॉजी उनका के बास्केट में ये गुड्स हैं, ये रिकॉल पीरियड है, वो सेम रहेगा, और कितना एक्सपेंडिचर व्हाट ही सेड दैट विल कंटिन्यू. बट नाउ वी हैव मूव्ड ऑन फ्रॉम हेडलाइन काउंट रेशियो टू एमपीआई. एवरी ईयर नीति आयोग गिव्स एमपीआई. There are few indices. The Global Findex Database 2021, released by whom? This becomes important. World Bank. See, the information or the facts are not important because UPSC doesn't ask about the performance of various states. Mostly it is who has released the index. So important is index and the publication. Finclusion, joint initiative, financial inclusion, permanent platform of post banks. Inclusion index released by FPI, RBI. So who has published this is what is important here. Key concepts on growth, development and poverty alleviation. What exactly is the meaning of the terms can be important for prelims. First is glass cliff. Anyone has an idea what is glass cliff? So the difference between ceiling and cliff is, ceiling means you can't go above that level. It is an unsaid policy of the institution not to let you go beyond that. And ceiling is if there is a difficult situation and you know it is bound to fail. You place certain person that is a particular gender so that they fail. So that you can put the blame on them. You know that the situation itself is of that of a failure. तो उसका blame के लिए किसी को place करना है, that is called as a glass cliff. Technical recession. Recession and technical recession, the definition is same. 2 consecutive quarters you have negative growth. Doom loop. What is doom loop? It's explained in the terms of banking. this is a vicious cycle, that you have one negative event, this will trigger another activity which will lead to a further negative event which will again bolster this. एक इवेंट होगा नेगेटिव जिससे फर्दर कोई एक्टिविटी होगी जिससे फिर एक नेगेटिव इवेंट होगा एंड इट विल कंटिन्यू इन दिस साइकिल. दिस इज अ लूप. व्हाई इट इज डूम? बिकॉज इट इज एक्सप्लेन्ड इन टर्म्स ऑफ बैंकिंग. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, बैंक्स आर होल्डिंग से, इंडिया में भी बहुत सारी गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटी है. ड्यू टू सर्टन इवेंट्स द प्राइजेस ऑफ दिस फॉल डाउन रैपिडली. The bond price can definitely fall of the bonds. The yield and bond price are inversely. इसकी yield चली जाएगी ऊपर, prices. Now this is an asset for the banks. I'm holding certain government securities. This is in my asset, and my asset is now losing value, due to which I am not giving, because my profitability is being reduced. मेरे asset की earning खत्म होती जा रही है. I will not give further loans because this is also what I deem to be certain risky event. क्योंकि अगर government security is giving more yield, that means loan price should also be very high. That means there is a risk of, there will also be a risk of default because now loan price is very high. क्योंकि अगर government security prices are going down, that means the yield on government security is going very high. If the yield on government security is very high, that means the loan rate should also be very high. Interest rates and yield will move together. So if this yield is high, the interest rate in the loan should be high. Higher loans का interest rate है और investment का ज़्यादा perspective नहीं है आगे, तो that means there could be a, due to which the bank will give no loans. Return on yield and return is the same. This is a government security. This will have a face value. This will have a maturity, and this will carry a coupon rate. For example, face value 100 rupees, maturity 1 year, and coupon rate. So anyone holding this bond after 1 year can take 105 rupees from me. You can't change anything else. I have issued it. After 1 year, you come and take 105 from me. Return is fixed. Bond is an instrument whose return is fixed. That is, after maturity, वो return fix ही देगा. Now, whoever is holding this bond, say for example, this person A bought this bond, but after 6 months he was in need of money. उसे पैसे चाहिए, उसे 100 रुपए, वो वेट नहीं कर सकता 1 साल तक. 100 दिए गवर्नमेंट को, पैसे वापस चाहिए 6 months में. So he is trying to sell this government security. Now, if a person B wants to buy this government security, will he buy it at 100 rupees? Why no? ले भी सकता है, क्यों नहीं लेगा? If the person B wants to buy this from A, will he buy this bond for 100 rupees? He can. On what factor it will depend? Demand किस factor पे depend करेगा? B के पास 100 rupees हैं, he will see his opportunity cost. That means next best decision he can take. Next best decision is the bank deposit. Bank interest rate on deposit is offering me, यहां मेरा रिटर्न है 8 रुपए, 108 मिलता है 1 साल बाद. यहां है 5 rupees. Why will I buy this bond, or why will anyone buy this bond? The demand of the bond will fall because the return is not same. When will someone buy this bond? When the return is higher than or equal to the bank. When it will be higher, when this 100 rupees bond is sold for, तभी 1 साल बाद वो 105 का मिलेगा, तभी मेरा रिटर्न 8 हुआ, right? This means if the interest rates in the market are high, that means the bond prices fall. Consider if the interest rates are increasing in the market. For example, this is went to 10%. Now when will you buy the bond? That means if the interest rate increase, the bond price falls. This is what we said, interest rates and bond prices move in the opposite direction. If this falls to 6%, you won't have to fault in 97, you will buy it at 99 only. तो अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट कम हो रहे हैं तो बॉन्ड प्राइस बढ़ रहा है. If the interest rate is increasing 8 to 10, that means you are also demanding 8 to 10. तो अगर yield बैंक पे increase हो रहा तो मेरा बॉन्ड पे भी increase होना चाहिए. So interest rate and yield will be directly related. क्योंकि अगर मेरे को इंटरेस्ट रेट पे 8 मिल रहा है, मेरे को बॉन्ड भी 8 देना चाहिए. वो 10 दे रहा है, मेरे को बॉन्ड भी 10 दे. ये 6 दे रहा है मुझे, ये भी 6 दे. So they both are directly related, they both are. And also from this you can say the yield on a bond is inversely proportional to bond price. When the bond price was 97 to 99, yield fell from 8 to 6. This is the basic relation. So now if the bank asset पे yield बढ़ रहा है, for example the government yield is increasing, then only the bond price will fall. This is what we just established. So if the yield in the market is increasing, and if the yield on government security is increasing, the most trusted source in the market is government. The yield on the government resource is increasing, that means market interest rate should increase. Government ही अगर इतने high rate पे ले रही है तो किसी और को तो उससे high rate पे मिलना चाहिए. That means the loan rate should increase. If the loan rate will increase, I will not be willing to give a loan. So this compounds the whole problem. पहले yield बढ़ गई, government was borrowing more, private investment nobody is doing, bank is not doing it. This is why it becomes a doom loop. In the inflation, if there is an inflation of 10%, what will happen to the yield? The yield has to rise, because if you are a person who wants to buy this bond, if the return on the bond is 8 rupees and the inflation is 10%, would you be willing to buy this bond? आपका return cover ही नहीं कर रहा आपका inflation को, so you will not be able to buy. So in case of inflation, you will have to give a higher yield. The yield has to rise in case of inflation, इसलिए bond price will fall further, because nobody will be ready to invest in a bond. It has to cover the inflation cost. Otherwise also, in case of inflation, if the inflation is very high, the demand of the bond will be high or low? The demand will be low. So if the demand is low now, to make it more attractive, it will have to reduce the, both cases the yield has to rise. अगर मेरे को effective yield नहीं मिलती inflation cover करने के लिए, I'm not going to buy the bond. So what we say is inflation means when the inflation rate is increasing, the yield has to match the inflation. So therefore the bond price will have to fall. This can lead to recession. Doom loop बिल्कुल is leading to recession. There is no economic activity happening. When one negative event, should counter cyclical effect होना चाहिए कि उस साइकिल को तोड़ें, ये उसको और डीपन करता जा रहा है. This is more pro-cyclical, that is why we call it as doom loop. नहीं, लोन रेट बढ़ेगा, इसमें बहुत कुछ डिफरेंट है. बैंक तो देना, दोनों चीज हो सकती है. अगर यील्ड बढ़ रही है, दैट मीन्स लोन्स इज गेटिंग प्राइसियर, तो बैंक को ये भी देखना है कि उसका मार्केट रिस्क और उसका वो कितना है, क्रेडिट रिस्क. नहीं, क्योंकि अगर कोई महंगा लोन ले रहा है तो क्या उसका प्रोजेक्ट इतना रेवेन्यू दे सकता है कि वो मेरी लोन की फिगर निकालेगा? बैंक कैन रिफ्यूज बिकॉज वो मार्जिन, फॉर एग्जांपल रिसेंटली दिस हैपेंड इन द इंडियन इकोनॉमी, मार्जिन रेट्स बैंक बढ़ाने लग गए क्योंकि लॉसेस हो रहे थे, लोन महंगे कर दिए. दे कैन डेफिनेटली टेक इनटू अकाउंट द मार्केट रिस्क विद दे आर फेसिंग, मार्केट रिस्क एंड ऑल्सो देयर क्रेडिट रिस्क. इसमें क्रेडिट रिस्क बढ़ जाएगा. नहीं, शॉर्टर रन्स में भी ज्यादा नहीं जा सकते. बैंक्स बहुत सेलेक्टिव हो जाएगा किसको देने किसको नहीं, बिकॉज वो आगे फेलियर हो सकता है हायर रेट पे भी. मैं इंटरेस्ट दे दूं 15% और उसका काम ही बंद हो जाए, वो 15% पे तो मुझे कुछ नहीं मिलेगा. दिस इज व्हाट द बिहेवियर ऑफ द बैंक इन सर्टेन इवेंट. तो नेगेटिव इवेंट को फिर उसने नेगेटिवली ही अप्रोच किया. दिस इज वाई डूम लूप. ये दीज कंडीशंस आर वेरी, सी All of this के banks देगा नहीं देगा, एक particular context बनेगा. So if the question is giving you that context, then you can answer accordingly. There could be not one answer that you can give कि absolutely bank यही करेगा. Creative economy, emerging concept, interface between creativity, culture, economics and technology. UN Commission on Trade and Development. International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development 2021. These facts are important for prelims. Urban 20, G20 का एक platform. G20 is very important because India has the presidency. So you should know the members and certain features also. Fourth Industrial Revolution. So there are two things, technology and sustainability. दोनों को counter करने के लिए we have twin transition. Panch Pran of Amrit Kal. You never know what questions can come. This is important. I like this. Financial intermediary fund. This can be a very important question. For pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. Platform of World Bank. G20 common framework पूछा है last year. Debt restructuring के लिए. दो statement थी. Similar question can come on financial intermediary fund. Pandemic preparedness and hosted by World Bank. Financial intermediary fund. Next is status of government finances. This we'll do after a break. Take a 5 to 10 minutes break and then discuss this. Page number किस पे आ गए? Shit, 11. Target 22. So if the first growth development is clear. Next is your status of government finances, the current account deficit. So there are two parts of the balance of payment. That is your current account and capital account. What's the difference between the two? Short term, long term. Is it short term, long term? Is this short term or long term? This is something which will have an impact on the asset or liability structure of the country. Something which alters the asset liability structure of the country, that is our capital account. Mostly business like transactions which do not have an impact on asset liability structure is current account transactions. This is the balance of payment accounts. One thing which they missed out is foreign exchange reserves part of current account, capital account, or is it part of balance of payment accounts? Is it part of balance of payment accounts or not? It is part of the capital account. The official reserves are also capital account. This movement in these indicators, this is called as autonomous transactions. Any change in official reserves is called as accommodating banking capital, company capital, or even the official reserves, that is your central bank's capital, is also part of capital account. Official reserves are part of capital account. Anything that moves here, it is called as autonomous transactions. Any movement in official reserves is accommodating transactions. This is your NCRT, macroeconomics. Any movement in these, apart from the reserve movement, is called as autonomous transactions. Something which are not dependent on official action. Official action के बिना चलते हैं अपने आप, business like deals or even long-term investments. This is something which there is no official action being taken place. When there is official action in the BOP account, it is called as accommodating transactions. So any movement in the official reserves is called as accommodating transactions. Apart from the movement in official reserves is called as autonomous transactions. So any transaction that happens on the current account and non-official reserves of capital account is called as accommodating transactions, and these are called as autonomous. Above the line, below the line. Is this clear? Speculative investment. foreign institutional investment. The difference between the two is this only. This is short term, foreign institutional, less than 10%. So India has mostly a current account deficit, and India's current account deficit is getting very severe. What are the reasons for current account deficits of India? The biggest is balance of trade negative. India has a huge dependence on imports on merchandise. Service is a huge plus. Income is negative. Transfer is a huge plus. India is the largest receiver of transfers in the world. Remittances, the largest receiver, India. The biggest is this. This is the reason for current account deficit. The basic, UPSC is always asked very basic questions on definitions itself. Reasons for current account deficit. What are the reasons for current account deficit in the recent years? What? Imports have become very costly. Why have imports become costly? The supply chain disturbances because of the Russia-Ukraine war. There have been two disturbances, not just the Russia-Ukraine war, also because of the pandemic. These two reasons have disrupted the global supply chain, due to which you have imports being costly. And one of the other reasons that incoming is very high and outgoing is, this is uncompetitive. Why are exports uncompetitive from India? Quality, high cost. Why the cost is high? Not labor. The reason being, one of the reasons being logistics. Sanitary, phytosanitary, agriculture also, but logistics is one of the major reasons why manufactured good exports is very less from India. So exports low, imports very high. What is the government doing to counter this? Sagarmala. Production linked incentive. And what is the government doing under production linked incentive? We are trying to create national champions. The whole idea under production linked incentive is that we are going to create few big players in each of the sectors, which not only going to have domestic value addition but also will have export potential. Not on all, but we are creating few big players. So under PLI, the government has selected how many sectors? 14 sectors. So you need to have an idea on all 14, because this is something which can be asked. 14 sectors for which targets are set by the government. Firms apply for PLI benefits. The firm is selected by the government. Targets are individually set by the government, and then on achievement on targets, you get certain incentives. Incentives can be on any form, but there would be monetary incentives given to all players, whoever is selected, and they achieve the target. PLI scheme is, it is not area dependent, it is firm dependent, it is sector dependent. PLI is given to both domestic and foreign players. देना दोनों को है, it is not कि किसी area में particularly देंगे. It will be given to both, and it will be sector based. Players can apply for PLI. The government will be selecting the players. वो चाहे SEZ में हो चाहे बाहर हो. And also now SEZs are being replaced by domestic enterprises services hub. Global commodity price, Russia-Ukraine war, and due to your pandemic, increased energy imports, need domestic demand, consumer spending. This is increase in quantity of imports. What could be the implication of increasing current account deficit? If the imports are increasing more, you can have depreciation of the currency. Depreciation is what is reducing the competitiveness. Depreciation will happen why? Less demand, more demand. Depreciation का cause क्या है? Current account deficit से depreciation क्यों हो रहा है? Demand for dollar is more, supply is less. Supply of dollars comes from where? ये supply है, demand है. If demand goes more, then this is the demand, this is the supply, this is what decides the value of dollar. If demand goes up, this is your depreciation, 70 to 80. Recently what India is saying, even the supply is being shortened because of outflow. इसीलिए official reserve action हो रहा है. RBI is reducing its reserves to counter this volatility. Strengthening state finances. Every year RBI comes out with a report on the performances of state finances, the study of state budgets. Now basic idea of state finances, what are the sources of income? You have tax revenue, own tax revenue, income, property, commodities, that is indirect SGST, tax devolution from center, this is finance commission, non-tax dividend profits, grants from union governments, article 282, article 275. Revenue deficit grants. Who gives revenue deficit grants? This revenue deficit grants comes on from the conditions of finance commission. These are recommended by finance commission, the revenue deficit grants. Given और कौन देगा यार? घर से थोड़ी लाएंगे, वो हमने सेंटर ही देगा, but on basis on finance commission recommendation. These are your state finances. Now what exactly is what does the report say? I have given few data points on this report. What exactly is this year the theme of the report by RBI, it is said capital formation in India, the role of states. Every year the RBI is coming out with a study on state finances, of the study of state budgets. This year January the report was released. It is called Capital Formation in India, the role of states. Now what are the key fiscal indicators? See, all of these graphs which I've given for state finances, the trend is important, not the information. So what you can have a question is, what is the trend of the fiscal deficit of the states in the last 5 years? Whether it is increasing, decreasing. So a lot of questions, trend-based questions can come from this report. Why this state finances report is becoming all the more important? Because the performance of state finances is now becoming very political. The whole debate of freebies, subsidies is because of the worsening state finances. Consider right now, the Punjab government is unable to present its budget, the governor is not giving permission. A lot of states faced problems in the last 6 months where they could not pay the salaries on time. Punjab was one example, Andhra Pradesh also facing the same problem, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, a lot of states. So the performance of state finances, and RBI is coming out with a report, so this becomes important. The trend here, analyzing the trend is important. It increased in the year 2020 to 21. It was decreasing significantly, but increased because of the pandemic. Now it is coming back under control. 3.7, this is the present account. The revised estimate 3.7, 2.8 is what the present account are saying. So it is now reducing. So if you have a question, what is the trend of the state's fiscal deficit in the last 5 years? It is not increasing or decreasing. पहले increase हुआ है, फिर decrease हुआ है. These are your indicators. The gross fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, 2.5, 2.6, 4.1, 3.5 to 3.7, and now 2.8. Budget estimates, revised estimates, and provisional accounts. Budget will always come out of 4 numbers. Budget, revised, account, and the next year budget estimates. So 4.1, 3.5, 3.7, and 2.8. Revenue deficit being 1.9, 0.5, 0.9, 0.4. So revenue deficit has increased. Budget se revised, revenue deficit expansion. Primary deficit 2.1, 1.6, 1.9. What's the difference between primary and gross fiscal deficit? The interest payments. Now where is the money coming from? The aggregate receipts of the state governments, the own revenue, central transfers, and non-debt capital receipts. States own tax revenue 7.7, 7.6, 7.4, 6.8, 7.5. So 1 year it has been decreasing. You don't have to remember the numbers, just the trend. Certain measures taken by the state governments to augment their revenue sources. This is all information of the report. Kerala and Rajasthan amnesty scheme, Punjab tax intelligence unit, Chhattisgarh a Karai Vardhan cell for augmentation of revenue, arrear payment Haryana and Assam, and Haryana has taken phased monetization of assets. These are some of the steps taken by the states to augment their finances. ये material में नहीं है, I've just added to give you an idea on the trends. Expenditure pattern, revenue, capital, and development or non-development. Revenue expenditure, 14%, 13.9, 14.9, 15.1, 15.3. It is consistently increasing. The revenue expenditure of the state, 2019-20 to 2022-23, 13.9, 14.9, 15.1, and 15.3. So just note down the trends what are happening from these graphs. The pattern of development expenditure, loans given for development expenditure, the non-development expenditures. This is the committed expenditure which the states have. This is the social sector expenditures. Again, the trends are important, how much the states are spending. Probability is less, but you never know. Liabilities of state governments and UTs, the total borrowings. And what it include? The market loans, the NSSF, loans from banks, loans from the center, and their public account. Capital formation, the gross capital formation. Now this curve is important. This graph, they've given the information. Since this report is talking about capital formation by the states and its role. Now this is talking about the gross capital formation in India by 4 different players. That is the government, private, public corporations, and households. This is the pattern of investments in India in the last 5 years, 16 to 20. This is your general government expenditure. Highest is coming from private corporations and households. This is a general government expenditure trend on capital formation, that is investment. Household nahi isse, private corporations. 2020-21 was household. Investment, private investment, why can't be it high? Private, both private and household. This is the RBI data. This is what there's a general government and public corporation sector wise. The percentage of total is the least. Both the governments and public corporation. Private households ज़्यादा है. Private corporations and households. Maximum expenditure उसका होगा. Agriculture. That's all private household. Dimensions. This is total investment. Gross capital formation, the I, the investment, general government expenditure, and the investment expenditure by the firms, including creation of new households by private households. Savings will convert into investment. They can take loans also. Savings ही investment में convert होंगी. Savings investment gap is fulfilled by your foreign investments. Savings ही तो investment में convert होंगी. From where are you, investment कहाँ से आएगी और? It's going to convert it into from savings itself. Someone is going to give money into the banks, which is going to convert it into loans. Saving FD से भी तो investment आएगा. Savings, why doesn't savings doesn't mean FD? Savings though could be anything like in your capital markets, in your formal financial institutions. That is what will go to convert it into investments. So FD will be savings. Why not? The FDI flow. This is the state-wise FDI equity flows, the top 10 states, and the sector-wise FDI equity flows in the top 9 sectors. This is last year. Similar is your municipal finances. Another report given by the RBI on the performance of municipal finances. The source of the local government revenue. Again, this is mostly important for mains, but RBI report, again, you just need to have a broader idea on what the trend is. This is the revenue receipts. Revenue receipts of the municipal. Same indicators almost. The own non-tax revenue comes from what all sources? Expenditure happens on what all sources? Most of it is revenue expenditure. Certain key performance ratios. The state finance commissions, how many have been constituted so far by different states. The conditions of borrowing from various states, whether they have conditions to borrow or not. The different municipal corporations in India. Different states, what are the conditions for borrowing? And certain alternative source of funds, for example, bond financing for urban local bodies. Under bond financing, the municipality is issuing bonds to get money for infrastructure funds. Another thing that has been proposed by the report is to have more of pooled financing instruments. Now under this, what the problem happens in this normal municipal bond is, when a municipality is giving out a bond, not every municipality is in a good financial condition कि उनके bond को अच्छी credit rating मिले. So a lot of municipal organizations are not able to issue bonds because of the poor finances. So what this is doing, state government can create a pooled fund which can issue bonds, and this total pooled fund can be used by different bodies. This is a pooled financing mechanisms, so that when individual municipal organizations are not able to get funds because of poor credit rating, एक fund बनाए जिनका different ULBs को can be offered this. So these are the two sources of financing which the RBI has proposed, which can help the municipal bodies to raise finance. Escrow account, the project fund जो return देगा इन सब से, वो रिटर्न से ही आपकी सर्विसिंग होगी. ये जितने भी प्रोजेक्ट्स बनेंगे, दे विल जनरेट सर्टन रेवेन्यू, सो दे रेवेन्यू विल गो इन दिस पूल फंड्स एस्क्रो अकाउंट. उसी एस्क्रो अकाउंट से डेट सर्विसिंग होगी फॉर देम. ये नॉर्मल म्यूनिसिपल बॉन्ड का भी जो पैसा कलेक्ट होगा प्रोजेक्ट का, दैट गोज इन एन एस्क्रो अकाउंट फ्रॉम वेयर इट इज बीइंग पेड. So both state finances and municipal finances are your reports given by the RBI. Just the trends are important here. States FRBM, what has happened here? Under Article 293, the states cannot borrow from any source if they have certain liabilities of the center. This is a condition given in the constitution, that states cannot borrow from any source if they have taken certain money from the center. So now this, every year they have to take permission from the center on its borrowings, because every state is indebted to the center. They have taken any form of loans from the center, so the center decides the condition for this borrowing. Both the limits and the conditions are decided by the center. This is Article 293. Now what was happening in the previous few years, this was a practice both of the center government and the state governments. Center government ended it in the last budget. They are no longer doing it. Even they are now enforcing it on the state governments. Now whenever the state is budgeting its expenditure and revenue, they used to play here on the expenditure. So for example, if the state has to give it certain subsidies or certain expenditure, has to do certain expenditure on some of its state PSU. Now what they were doing was, they were not giving this money to the state PSU, and instead were asking the state PSU to take a loan from the market. This is called as off-budget borrowing. Now if the expenditure would have been counted here, the fiscal deficit of the state government would have been turned very high. So they are not accounting for this expenditure, instead are asking the state PSUs to take the loans on their books. State PSU is different from the state budget. PSUs have different formations. For example, what are the different types of PSUs? Departmental and what? What are the different types? So understanding the type is important, then only off-budget borrowings will make sense. What are the different types of PSUs? There are three types of PSUs. One is your departmental undertaking. This is just like a ministry or a department under a ministry, where it is a part of the government itself. For example, railways or Ministry of Telecom or Posts. These are just like a ministry or a department of the government. Their finance, their running, everything happens just like a government ministry. They are not separate from the government. Completely controlled by the ministry, and their budget will also be done by the ministry, given their demand for grants to the Ministry of Finance. Everything will be run just like a department of a ministry or a separate ministry altogether. Then there is a separate creation that happens is, this is called as a statutory corporation. In a statutory corporation, the formation of PSU is through an Act of Parliament, or this can be created by a state legislature as well. So both Act of Parliament and state legislature is what decide its functioning, its rules and regulations, everything. Even its relationship with the ministry is decided by this Act of Parliament. So everything is decided by the Act of the Parliament or the state legislature, the relationship between the ministry and the PSU itself. Now this means PSU is a separate legal entity. It is not just like a ministry. In the previous case, it was acting as a department to the ministry or was a separate ministry altogether. This was part of the government. This is now a separate legal entity that has been created. Then there's another form which is called as the government company. This is not run by the Act of Parliament, but this is just like another company which is registered under the Companies Act. Iska registration, this is owned by the government but is registered under the Companies Act. This is made by the Act of Parliament or the state legislature. Example, all of these are statutory corporations. Recently, a departmental undertaking was converted into a corporation. LIC. In fact, ONGC was earlier a departmental undertaking, then it became a this. Air India is not government now. Air India's strategic sale. Ordnance Factory Board. The Ordnance Factory was a department under the Ministry of Defence. 6 PSUs, 6 different creations. The same thing the government is trying to do for ports also. So this is what is corporation or government company, where you have a separate legal entity which is your government company or government corporation. It is linked to the ministry because at the end of the day ministry is giving the money to run the PSU. Capital government का है वो control तो होगा ही, but this control will be determined by this act or by the Companies Act. This is not like a departmental undertaking. Now when you are not a departmental undertaking, that means any of your functions will not be part of the government budget. आपका अपना separate entity है तो आपका board है, आपका अपना अलग finances होंगे, they will not be part of the ministry. When they are not part of the ministry, this is what the government has done both at the center and the states. They do not give the expenditure here and instead ask them to take a, and this is why this is called as off budget borrowing. Same thing government used to do with FCI. The money for the food subsidy has to come from the central government, and this money the government is not giving them, instead is asking them to take a loan. This is called as off budget borrowing. Borrowings by the PSU or any other institutions created by the state, not mentioned under the budget. This is why it is off budget borrowing. So now under Article 293, this year the government has said even your off budget borrowings, they will be counted under the conditions which we give. Borrowing by state owned companies, special purpose vehicle or agencies which borrow from the market will be considered under the limit. Earlier they were flouting the limit because these borrowings were not reflecting in the budget. तो अब जो ये borrowing करेंगे वो आपकी उसी limit में count होगा, which we have given under Article 293. The net borrowing ceiling of each state is fixed by the government in the beginning of each financial year because of Article 293. The net borrowing is 3.5% of the total GSDP of the, as recommended by the 15th Finance Commission. तो अब जितनी भी बोरोइंग you are going to do here will be counted under your limit. Is this clear? What is this? Center is not doing it. Center ने last year budget बंद कर दिया ये. See, center when you have to implement your own rules. जैसे FRBM है 2003 से वो keep on extending. So who will apply it on center? Who will enforce it on center? यहाँ तो center के पास ये article 293 की power है. Who will apply it? 2020-21, the CAG report categorically mentioned that the central government is doing a lot of off-budget borrowings. Now this is why the encasing panel and everybody has said that India should have a independent fiscal council. हाँ वो उसी में count होगा. Yes, it will be counted now inside this limit only. This the government has clarified this year कि इसी limit के अंदर ही वो count होगा the total borrowings. So what you are borrowing from the other bodies also, which is your off-budget borrowing, वो इसी limit में counter होगा. Center के लिए ये body बोला है encasing panel ने भी and different committees also that independent fiscal council होना चाहिए, which will also check your budget numbers and enforce these FRBM limits on you. कोई भी ऐसी state नहीं है. Consider when you start development, from where are the states going to get the tax revenue? At a poor stage of development, no state is rich enough to get the tax revenue for development. They have to depend on the money loans from the center. This is why if you see the genesis of planning commission, why did the states not say anything when planning commission was created? Planning commission was a totally centralized body. So even your creation of your centrally sponsored scheme, you know what a centrally sponsored scheme? What exactly is the idea of CSS? ये भी planning commission का काम है. Centrally sponsored scheme is scheme on a state subject which is designed by the center and implemented by the state, and the center and the state money which is to be shared. ये center का money जो आता है, it is tied funds. It is based on conditionalities. So state have no role apart from just giving their funds. A problem इसमें design भी आप कर रहे हो, fund हमारा है. States can't say anything because states don't have the money. वो 60% यहाँ से नहीं आता है, 90% यहाँ से नहीं आता, state के पास पैसे नहीं है. The whole reason why states accepted planning commission and states have done it because states never had the tax capacity to get. Consider what is the essence of revenue deficit grants. दे इसलिए रहे क्योंकि किसी के स्टेट के पास, बहुत स्टेट्स के पास कैपेसिटी नहीं है टू जनरेट रेवेन्यू. द होल आइडिया ऑफ स्टेट फाइनेंसेस, वन साइड ऑफ द पिक्चर इज स्टेट्स इन इंडिया जनरेट वेरी लेस टैक्स रेवेन्यू. It is revised every year. The government just keeps on postponing the FRBM targets. 2018 they introduced an escape clause which gave them a further lease because of the pandemic. Otherwise they are extended every year. It's not being implemented. This FRBM of states is different. Fiscal responsibility legislation every state has different, जिसमें 3% का FD का उन्होंने हर किसी ने अपना टारगेट रखा हुआ है और वो ट्राई कर रहे हैं अचीव करने की. This is why we are studying state finances. Why is state finances every year the RBI is studying the state report on budget? Now problem what is happening is states tax revenue is not increasing. They have further liabilities from Uday and they are also announcing populist measures. So their committed expenditure is increasing year on year. Revenue is not expanding. And under the FRL limits, the fiscal responsibility limits, they have to contain their fiscal deficit. तो वो fiscal deficit contain कैसे कर रहे हैं अपना capital expenditure कम करके. So year on year they are reducing their capital expenditure, and capital expenditure in India more than 70% happens through the state. तो अगर state capital expenditure अपना कम करेंगी for FRL, it is going to be a problem. This is why you have this conflict between center and states where they're talking about freebies. Because now everything is getting out of hand. And states are compromising everything. Consider most of the states you will see, one expenditure they are compromising is on health and education. Every year you will find a lot of states, they are merging schools. No new public health facilities are being opened up, उसी पे compromise is shifting to private. तो out of pocket expenditure will increase because state facilities are absent. तो इसीलिए year on year, last 3-4 years only, RBI is studying the state of the budgets of state. In 2003 उसके बाद NK Singh has given further recommendations. Revised targets of encassing committee, yes. But this is not, in fact, they're not implementable. मतलब हर साल the central government keeps on postponing the targets. So the question what has come on FRBM is one this: what are the documents mandated under FRBM, and what is the general idea of FRBM? If fiscal, we need discipline. So FRBM is a law which tries to enforce discipline. But the problem is who is going to enforce it on them. This is why independent fiscal council की एक demand है, क्योंकि UK and US both have this congressional budget office, जो वो ये इन पे enforce कराता है. इंडिया में कोई बॉडी नहीं है, इसीलिए वो दे कीप ऑन पोस्टपोनिंग. एंड नाउ इफ यू सी दिस ईयर आल्सो, टू कंटेन देयर फिस्कल डेफिसिट, व्हाट हैज द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट डन? द सोशल एक्सपेंडिचर स्कीम्स हैव सीन अ वेरी बिग कट. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर बढ़ रहा है, सोशल एक्सपेंडिचर इन टर्म्स ऑफ हेल्थ, एजुकेशन एंड योर मनरेगा, लॉट ऑफ स्कीम्स हैव सीन अ वेरी बिग कट. तो वो यही है, क्योंकि अगर वो कंटेन करेंगे, दिखाना है फिस्कल डेफिसिट छोटा, तो कहीं तो दे विल हैव टू कॉम्प्रोमाइज. Advisory, constitutional body, it doesn't have power, और उसका function is only distribution of tax revenue between the two. There's no independent, because right now the problem in India is, जब budget में number announce हो गए, who checks whether the numbers are right or wrong? If you see year on year, the difference between budget estimate and revised estimates. अभी मनरेगा के they have cut the allocation to show a smaller fiscal deficit. Revised में वो जो double amount देना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि payment dues हो जाएंगे. नहीं, फिर तो सब कुछ ही इंडिपेंडेंस, दैट इट शुड नॉट बी इन्फ्लुएंस्ड. व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ आरबीआई और इलेक्शन कमीशन और यूपीएससी? नॉट व्हाट दे डू, बट उनका प्रिंसिपली तो दे आर इंडिपेंडेंट बॉडीज, राइट? द होल आइडिया ऑफ क्रिएटिंग इंडिपेंडेंट सेक्टोरल रेगुलेटर्स 91 के बाद, कंसिडर व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ स्टेट. टिल 91 इंडिया वाज डूइंग वन थिंग, वेयर स्टेट वाज एक्टिंग एज अ provider and even the regulator. The license quota permit Raj strictly regulating everything. After 91, India opened up for the market. Now when you open up for the market, what is the state going to do? State can't do the regulator function. Why? This is highly controversial. The state should not be doing the regulator function. Why? Because state is itself has not left the sector. Bola hai privatization, we are going to leave. But if you see from 91 till now, how many PSUs have closed down? So state has not left. So if in any sector, you have the state PSU and you have the private. ये private क्यों आएगा जब regulator ही state होगा? This will never come because they know they are going to influence it. So they are going to set the rules and regulations of the sector such that it is going to favor the incumbent PSU. They are going to come only when there is a level playing field. This level playing field cannot be created by the state. This can only be created by an independent institution. And this is why you need independent sector regulators. This is the role of why do you need these independent institutions? Because rule making should be independent, it should be equal for all. Now consider right now what is happening. If you see the draft telecommunication bill, the draft telecommunication bill says that the role of TRAI will not be of a regulatory body but of a recommendatory body. वो भी state अब लेना चाह रहा है. And the problem is that if you do not have independent sector regulators, who is going to think about the long term stability of the sector? Because if it is dominated by the state, this is definitely going to have not corruption, but they're going to see short-term gains also, which can win them elections. This is why the biggest conflict between government and RBI. Government wanted lower interest rates because this is what will push the investment activity. RBI will not allow that because there is inflation. But if the state controls the RBI, it can do whatever it wants. Right now what you are seeing, one of the biggest players in the economy, there are allegations of market manipulation. What are the statements given by SEBI? So this is independent sector regulators, because a lot of money is at stake. Consider the same in developed economies. तभी institutions की importance है independent sector regulators की. You have to work in an independent manner. A problem with fiscal policy is who enforces it on the state to be more disciplined. Center can do it on the states because Article 293 gives them the permission. What it does on the state, this is why they year on year they keep on progressing. And if you check, one of the things is you just check what the budget does. There's no use of the budget in India. Every year they give certain budget estimates which these are the three figures, the budget estimates, revised estimates and the actual estimates. In तीनों में every year see the difference. And also see budget estimates for a lot of schemes. What is the amount of fund which is unutilized? So that means on one end, some schemes are getting less money which you have to revise and increase so much. Some schemes you are not able to utilize. How exactly is the government managing its expenditure? This is one of the biggest problem with the central government. Consider another policy. Budget mein every year they announce very big targets of how many they are able to achieve. 2.1 lakh crore was the disinvestment target of last year. The maximum they achieved was 80,000 crore, जिसमें से 25 to 35 they estimated of LIC जब तक किया नहीं था. And this year that is why they have a very modest target of disinvestment. Because the capacity is lacking. The whole idea is the government though has money, where is the capacity for doing all this? This is one of the biggest problem of the 91 reforms. State is moving out of all sectors, leaving space for only private. They have not invested in delivering any of the goods and service. This is why when the state, even when the revenue received after 91 has increased multiple times, the state is not delivering anything with efficiency because they have not invested in their capacity. And this is why consider any sector, you will find that the government is moving towards. What's the scheme of government in health sector? What is Ayushman Bharat? Insurance. There is no investment in capacity. That you could not get. Yes, the health and wellness centers at the primary level and the insurance. You see the quantum of funds which they have given to health and wellness center and the quantum of funds they have dedicated to Ayushman Bharat. Consider any of the schemes, the government is moving towards more and more private. Institutions of eminence given to private institutes. Foreign universities set up here. Nobody is talking about more private sector universities. Private or public sector universities or even public health institutions. This is what is happening. तो वो बजट अगर बजट कर भी रहे हैं, ज़्यादा पैसे भी हैं, तो कैपेसिटी नहीं है किसी भी चीज़ को इन्वेस्ट करने की. This is why you see a very big number. अब यहीं पे independent fiscal council would have helped. Independent fiscal council का काम यही है कि to first give you estimates which are more scientific, which are more rational, and then see what exactly is happening in its implementation, and also enforce the fiscal discipline on you through FRBM. And whether you are spending right or not, because one of the problems is budget का बाद में expenditure का you get a report from the, but this is when the expenditure has already happened. This is when the whole thing is already ex post. Ex ante नहीं है कि पहले क्या करना है. There is no provision. Even estimates committee doesn't help a lot here, because estimate committee का time period 1 year है and it doesn't get a lot of time to also do this. So this is why you have a mismanagement at the central level. This is your state FRBM, Article 293 and the municipal financing. Just go through the report, the various factors. Taxation, goods and service tax. A lot of questions have already appeared on GST. What's the idea of this value added tax? This is what happens. Tax on tax. 13 rupees tax is coming from where? 10% on 100, 10, plus on the next 10, 1, and to the value added 2. This is on the 100, this is on the, and this is on the value add. This is cascading effect tax on tax. This 100 has already been paid here. So 100 पे 10% लगा, 10 has already been paid here. So 1 rupee is extra tax on tax. Because this 10 was already paid. As 100 pay 10 rupees, tax has already been paid. So this 10 rupees, pay 1 rupees, this is called your tax on tax. This is both causing a cascading effect of taxes. Under the value added regime, that is your GST, this is 110. The product here will be of 110, but B will receive 10 rupees input tax credit. On top of it, it will add value. So the total good is 120. 10% on 120 is, the total good becomes 132 as compared to 143. This 10 rupees has already been paid at this, which is part of 110. So this becomes your input tax credit. So effectively the total tax on this whole transaction would be 12, which will be paid by the consumer. This is why indirect tax, the incidence is shifted to the incidence is on the manufacturer, the impact is on the consumer. Total tax on value added, 10 rupees here and 2 rupees from B, that is total 12. This is the idea of GST. Remove the cascading effect and tax only on value addition. Now in this case, the total tax collection by the government was how much? 13. Here is 12. So the tax on tax has been removed. Is there no less tax collection by the government? Then why is GST more beneficial? Since everyone will have to now maintain books if they want to claim informal tax credit, therefore GST will lead to widening of tax base. Now various modalities in GST. There are few items which are still not part of GST. That is alcohol, electricity, stamp duty, property tax, basic custom duty, petroleum, diesel and related fuels. All of this are outside the ambit of GST. These all are part. GST Council, Center and States, 279A, more powers to the center as compared to states, the unequal representation of states in terms of total weightage. Sin goods, circular trading, input tax credit. What is sin good? Non-merit goods which have a negative impact on the society. For example, alcohol, cigarettes, sin goods. Input tax credit already. One problem point of contention between the center and states has been your GST compensation. What is the idea of GST compensation? Why was GST compensation given? New taxation? Loss of tax. So how much loss of revenue? To the manufacturer state. So it is a destination based state, so something was realized that manufacturer states might lose revenue. But how much? What's the idea of GST compensation says? How could the center bring states on all one platform and also asking the states to share their powers of taxation? A recent judgment has come from Supreme Court, Mohit Minerals, which says that GST compensation or GST Council is only recommendatory in nature. The powers of taxation to the states come from the Constitution and nobody can take that powers away. So this is now what the center has given a clarification. We always have the understanding that we are going to work together. We know that GST Council is recommendatory in nature. This is a threat to the whole system because the states can apply their own taxes now. This is given by the Constitution. They can break away from the GST. But what exactly was the idea of GST compensation says? Loss of revenue. Based on what loss of revenue? The central government had promised that every state is going to get a 14% net growth on their revenues. If they're not going to get this percentage growth, then there will be a compensation which will be paid for the next 5 years. Next 5 years, there is a growth of 14% on your tax revenue. If this does not happen, you are going to get a compensation. And this compensation is going to come from a cess, which would be levied on certain luxury goods. Now this has been extended to, the cess has been extended to further 5 more years, from 22 to 26. The cess has been extended, but we don't know what will happen, whether the center will pay compensation or not. Now why this is a issue? Because in the pandemic years, the states did not get this percentage of growth. So therefore the demand for compensation was high, but the cess was not enough. सेस की कलेक्शन से ही कॉम्पनसेशन जाना था. पैंडेमिक में ग्रोथ हुई नहीं, कॉम्पनसेशन डिमांड बढ़ गई, सेस कलेक्शन वाज नॉट दैट हाई. सो देयर वाज अ कंडीशन वेयर द सेंटर आस्क्ड द स्टेट्स टू बोरो. The states refused. Now the center itself had borrowed the money to pay the compensation. Now to pay for that borrowed money, they have extended the compensation. This is the idea of extension of compensation. It had to end on 2022. It got extended because GST Council had to pay for further compensation because of the pandemic. This is the idea of GST compensation cess. Certain goods pre-packaged and labeled, GST applicability has changed. This is also important because UPSC in one of the prelims has asked this question. GST is applicable on which of the items? So pre-packaged and labeled goods thoda include kiye hai. Anti-profiteering. The CBDT, the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, they empowered the Competition Commission of India to decide on anti-powering. This is also very important. What is anti-profiteering? What is profiteering? Not pay? Shifting the profits. What type of profits? In this situation, the price of the good was 143. Now you have got a 10 rupees input tax credit. If you still keep the price of the good at 130 and not 120, this is called as profiteering. आपको सरकार ने 10 रुपए input tax credit दे दिया है. If you do not minus this in your final good, that means you're charging more from the consumer. This is called as profiteering. To control for this, the government has anti-profiteering rules. उन anti-profiteering rules को apply करेगा Competition Commission of India. Because this input tax credit you have received, ideally this should not go in the final cost of the product. If it goes in the final cost, this is called as profiteering. आपने 10 रुपए गवर्नमेंट से भी ले लिए, 10 कंज्यूमर पे भी चार्ज करती है. This is profiteering. This is the Center Board of Indirect Taxes. This is National Anti-Profiteering Authority. This is why given to Competition Commission. GST, there are a lot of rules and regulations. Zero based? Zero rating and exempt. So what happens in zero rating is that the final output is given. Pure chain mein it's not getting the input tax credit. When it is exempt from GST, the whole thing is getting, wait, zero rated and exempt. Zero rated mein, if the product is moving, if the product is exempt, that means at D, this stage, you are not going to pay any GST. There is no GST, the product is exempt, ye puri chain pe you don't get any input tax credit. So these three people will not be able to claim input tax credit, but if it is zero rated, you can claim input tax credit here. This is the difference between exempt and zero rated. Exempt is a loss making क्योंकि यहाँ पे चार्ज नहीं कर रहे GST, पर पीछे भी कोई input tax credit नहीं मिलता. This is why cascading effect still exists in petrol and all these natural gases because these are exempt from GST. तो पिछली वाली chain can't get the input tax credit. वो पेट्रोल यहाँ से यहाँ जब जाएगा वो उस पे टैक्स दोबारा देना पड़ेगा. इस वाले बंदे को नहीं देना पड़ेगा. This is exempt, but under zero rated, that means everybody can claim input tax credit as well. There is no naming बस. और both of them are recommendatory. कोई final powers भी नहीं है दोनों के पास. Niti Aayog. This is what politically has been. For Niti Aayog to fir bhi there is no authority because Niti Aayog doesn't have money distribution functions. Niti Aayog cannot distribute money. All of the money has to come from Ministry of Finance only. Whatever grants are coming from the center, वो Ministry of Finance ही disperse करेगा. Planning Commission was doing a lot of fund dispersion function. Niti Aayog cannot disperse any funds. Digital tax. A small topic. If there is a company in US that is google.com, it has no physical presence in India, but it is giving certain services to Indian players also. For example, they have given certain domain यहाँ पे players को to display ads. So therefore google.com is earning revenue from India, but since it has no physical presence, it is not paying any taxes to the Indian authorities. To counter such type of transactions, the government came out with a equalization levy. This is what is called as the digital tax. Any entity which does not have a physical presence in India but is earning revenue from India now will also be taxed. This is called as equalization or digital service. The initial equalization levy was only placed on Google, which was selling ad service. Entities which were selling only advertisement services, equalization levy was placed. Now the government has come out with the equalization levy 2.0, where the equalization levy is not just paid on ad services but also in e-commerce website. So that means e-commerce Indian नहीं, US होगा या किसी और country में. For example, Amazon.com, not Amazon.in. So if you do any transaction on Amazon.com, it is earning a revenue from India, it is going to pay a tax on this. This equalization levy has also become important for the global taxation system, and OECD has introduced this under its globe rules, where there are two pillars, pillar 1 and pillar. Under pillar 1, it is saying that companies which are not paying taxes but have generating revenue from offshore sources, they are going to pay a digital service tax. Equalization levy अब सब companies पे लगेगा जिनका physical presence नहीं है but they are generating revenue from it. The second pillar, and this digital service tax is only applicable on few companies. They have given certain conditions. They have given conditions. It will only apply with companies having a turnover above 20 billion euros and their profitability should be above 10%. Excess profit should be more than 10%. 10% अपने revenue से ऊपर जो उनका आएगा उसके ऊपर they are going to place a digital service tax. So this reduces the tax base a lot. Only on countries global turnover more than 20 billion euros and profitability above 10%. Now what is the problem with this is that when this is coming under implementation, this is pillar 1, when this will be implemented and India is part of this, no country will be able to apply its own digital service tax. That means India, which was taking equalization levy from advertisement companies and e-commerce companies, they will not be able to do that. Now this will be applicable on all countries. This is why India, along with like-minded countries, has formed a group which is called as G24. कि ये हमारा loss of sovereignty है. Because the whole idea is that you are going to take it from a very less number of companies. So we will lose a substantial amount of revenue because इतना revenue आएगा नहीं इंडिया से, तो वो tax मिलेगा नहीं. And you are asking us to not take any form of digital service tax. This is why India, along with like-minded countries, have formed a grouping G24, objecting the proposal of making sovereign commitments to not introduce any future digital service tax like equalization levy or implementation of global tax deal. ये global tax deal है. The other end of this global tax deal is your The pillar 2 is trying to introduce a global minimum tax. This is to counter base erosion, profit shifting. What happens under base erosion, profit shifting? A company A opens a subsidiary in low tax base, tax haven country, where the tax percentage is say only, the tax here is, so it will not show its profit. For example, the company A has a profit of $1,000. Ideally, the profit should be registered here from where the parent company is. It will remove the profits from here. It will only show a profit of say $100 here and show most of its profit here in the low tax jurisdiction. This is called as base erosion and profit shifting. This eroded the base from 1000 to 100 and shifted the profit to a low tax haven country and got the benefits of tax savings. Now what the second pillar is saying, that every country will have to have minimum 15% tax. So now in this scenario, if Ireland keeps 2%, the additional 13% will be paid in US. This is how a global minimum tax rate of 15% will be applicable. You keep any tax, rest we are going to charge here. This will force the tax haven country to charge more taxes. This is done to avoid base erosion, profit shifting. So two OECD tax pillars under the globe rules. One is introducing tax on companies without having any without having any physical base, but earning revenue. So they are going to pay a digital service tax and a global minimum tax rate to counter base erosion, profit shifting. This is the OECD two-pillar plan. India is saying we have a problem with first, because the first is saying no country can impose their own thing. 6% equalization levy. Second was done in 2020. UPSC asked a question, when was equalization levy introduced? As part of what? It was introduced in the budget as part of the Finance Act. Part 2 also. Finance Act. There are two acts in budget. Appropriation to expenditure, finance to change the tax. Change the tax, Finance Act. हाँ पिलर 2 बिकॉज आयरलैंड से अगर उन्होंने वहाँ पे दिखाया प्रॉफिट टैक्सेशन और उन्होंने देयर इज नो फिजिकल प्रेजेंस, दे हैव नॉट ओपनड एन ऑफिस, दे हैव जस्ट अ डिजिटल यू कैन से प्रेजेंस आयरलैंड, तो वहाँ पे अगर उन्होंने प्रॉफिट दिखाया यहाँ नहीं, तो वहाँ 2% 13% या इवन व्हेन देयर इज नॉट फिजिकल. ये रॉयल्टी से शिफ्ट करा लेते हैं वहाँ पे कि रॉयल्टी वहाँ बेच दिया, पेटेंट के सारे पैसे वहाँ मिल गए उसको. दिस इज हाउ इट विल काउंटर. वो सब्सिडरी के थ्रू ही तो शिफ्ट करेगा. द होल आइडिया ऑफ मिनिमम टैक्स रेट इज प्रॉफिट इरोजन, बेस इरोजन, प्रॉफिट शिफ्टिंग. हाउ विल इट शिफ्ट द प्रॉफिट? This is G24, Inter-Government Group on the International Monetary Affairs and Development, G77, created in 1972. Member India is a member, headquarter Washington, US. You need to know about G24 and its significance. DST point 2, equalization levy point 2, what it is applicable on trade and services of foreign e-commerce companies. Introduced as a part of Finance Act 2020. Few information about OECD, even this can be asked, you just need to have an idea. G24 is more important. Next, taxation on virtual digital assets, we'll start tomorrow.